Rain hammered the roof of the Ford F-150 like judgment from a god Marcus Reid had stopped believing in 6 months ago. The parking lot of the Home Depot in Omaha stretched empty around him, fluorescent lights creating pools of sick yellow against the March darkness. Inside the truck bed, under a tarp that leaked at three corners, lay everything Marcus owned at 52 years old. Tools mostly, a duffel bag of clothes, a sleeping bag that smelled like defeat in cheap laundromats. He shifted on the reclined driver's seat, trying to find a position where his back didn't scream. 3 months sleeping in a truck had taught him that the human spine wasn't designed for this. Neither was the human spirit, but here he was anyway. The phone in his hand glowed with an unanswered text from his daughter. She'd sent it 4 hours ago. Mom says I should stop visiting, says it's not healthy for me to see you like this. No question mark, no room for argument. Just the flat declaration of a 16-year-old who'd learned from her mother that the most effective wounds were delivered without emotion. Marcus typed 3 different responses and deleted them all. What could he say? That he was fine? That sleeping in a Home Depot parking lot was some kind of character-building experience? That the man who'd once employed 15 people and owned a 3-bedroom house in a good school district hadn't somehow failed at the basic task of being human? His finger hovered over the send button on a 4th attempt. I love you, Soph. 3 words. Simple. True. Pathetic in their inadequacy. He deleted that too. The divorce had been surgical. That was the word that kept coming back to him in the small hours when sleep wouldn't come, and the past replayed itself with the persistence of a song you couldn't get out of your head. Surgical. Clean. Precise. Linda hadn't destroyed him in a moment of passion or rage. She'd simply dismantled his life with the methodical care of someone taking apart a piece of furniture they no longer wanted. The lawyer she'd hired, Victoria Hartman, had been terrifyingly good at her job. Marcus remembered sitting in that conference room 6 months ago, watching Victoria present her case like a prosecutor going after a serial killer. Every financial decision he'd made in the last 5 years, cataloged. Every business loan, documented. Every late payment, every missed deadline, every contractor who'd complained about delayed invoices. 25 years of marriage reduced to a PowerPoint presentation that made Marcus Reid look like a man too incompetent to be trusted with his own life. Linda Reid, she'd kept his name even as she took everything else, had sat beside her lawyer with the expression of someone watching a necessary but unpleasant medical procedure. Not angry, not sad, just done. That was worse somehow. Marcus could have fought against anger. Against sadness, he might have found forgiveness. But against that flat, final indifference, he'd had nothing. Mr. Reid clearly lacks the competence to manage the household finances, Victoria had said, her voice carrying the professional sympathy of a veterinarian explaining why a pet needed to be put down. My client has documented years of poor business decisions, failed investments, and ultimately the complete collapse of Reid Construction. She has a responsibility to protect herself and their daughter from further financial harm. Marcus's lawyer, a tired man named Robert Hayes, who'd been recommended by a friend and charged rates that suggested why, had mounted a defense that felt like watching someone fight with foam swords. My client built that business from nothing. The economic downturn, the supply chain issues, these were factors beyond his control. And yet other contractors in the Omaha area managed to survive, Victoria had countered. The common factor in Mr. Reid's failures appears to be Mr. Reid himself. The house had gone to Linda. It was in her name for tax purposes, she'd explained years ago, when Marcus had signed the papers without really reading them. At the time, it had seemed like smart financial planning. Now it seemed like evidence of how thoroughly he'd been outmaneuvered by someone who'd been planning an exit strategy while he was still picking out anniversary gifts. The business savings, somehow most of it had migrated into accounts Marcus couldn't touch. Linda had always been better with numbers. He'd been happy to let her handle it. Another mistake cataloged in Victoria's presentation. Your client will maintain primary custody of Sophia Reid, the judge had said, barely looking up from the paperwork. Mr. Reid will have visitation rights supervised at Ms. Reid's discretion. He will retain his personal tools, his vehicle, and will be responsible for child support payments in the amount of $1,500 per month. $1,500 a month. Marcus had been sleeping in his truck at the time, having sold his construction equipment to pay the worst of the business debts. He'd wanted to laugh at the absurdity. Instead, he'd just nodded. The worst part, The thing that still woke him up at 2 in the morning with his heart hammering was the moment after the judge's ruling when he looked at Linda, really looked at her, trying to find some remnant of the woman he'd married at 27. The woman who'd laughed at his jokes and believed in his dreams and promised that they'd build something beautiful together. She'd looked back at him with the eyes of a stranger. The rain intensified, turning the world beyond the windshield into a blur of lights and water. Marcus reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a flask. He'd bought it a month ago, telling himself it was just for the cold nights, just a little something to take the edge off, just enough to let him sleep. He unscrewed the cap and then sat there, staring at it. His father had been a drinker. Not the fun kind, the kind who told stories and bought rounds at the bar. The quiet, methodical kind who used whiskey as a slow form of suicide. Marcus had sworn he'd never become that, had sworn a lot of things. He put the cap back on without drinking and shoved the flask back into the glove compartment. Small victories, pathetic ones, but better than nothing. His phone buzzed. For a moment, hope flared that maybe Sophia had changed her mind, had sent another message. But it was just a spam email. He almost deleted it, then stopped when he saw the subject line. Historic Kansas ranch as is, $1. Probably scam. Definitely scam. Marcus's thumb moved toward delete, but something made him pause. Maybe it was the absurdity of the offer. Maybe it was the way the word historic suggested a story, and stories were better than the endless replay of his own failures. Maybe he was just so desperate for any kind of distraction that even obvious spam seemed appealing. He opened it. The email was from a county clerk's office in Harper County, Kansas. That alone gave it a hint of legitimacy that Nigerian princes and crypto investors couldn't match. The message was brief, almost apologetic. Harper County is liquidating a long-abandoned property through tax foreclosure. The minimum bid has been set at $1 plus assumption of $8,000 in back taxes. Property is sold as is, no warranties, no utilities, no guarantees of habitability. Interested parties should contact our office. There were photos attached. Marcus clicked through them with the morbid fascination of someone watching a car crash. A house that leaned like a drunk against the Kansas wind. A barn that had partially collapsed, its frame exposed like the ribs of a dead animal. Fence lines dissolved into rust and weeds. Tumbleweeds piled against what might have once been a porch. It was the most depressing thing Marcus had seen in 6 months of seeing depressing things, which probably explained why he couldn't look away. He zoomed in on the house. The bones were good. He could see that even through the decay. Someone had built this place to last, had used real lumber and honest craftsmanship. Under all the rot and ruin, there was structure. The kind of structure that could be saved if a man knew what he was doing and wasn't afraid of hard work. Marcus knew both those things, or at least he used to. He checked his bank account, $9,214. Everything left after selling his equipment, paying debts, and somehow staying alive for 3 months. $8,000 for back taxes would leave him with $1,200. Enough to maybe, possibly, if he was very lucky and very careful, make the move to Kansas and survive until he figured out what the hell happened next. It was insane, obviously insane. Trading a parking lot in Omaha for an abandoned ranch in the middle of nowhere with no plan, no prospects, and no guarantee of anything except more failure. Marcus dialed the number before he could talk himself out of it. A woman answered on the third ring, her voice carrying the particular weariness of someone who worked in government offices and had long ago stopped being surprised by humanity's capacity for poor decisions. Harper County Clerk, this is Margaret. I'm calling about this property listing, Marcus said, the ranch for $1. There was a pause, during which Marcus could hear the clicking of a keyboard. You're serious? Margaret asked. Should I not be? Well, another pause. Sir, I should tell you that property is in very rough shape. Been abandoned near 20 years. No utilities. Well's probably dry. Septic's anyone's guess. The house is structurally unsound. The barn's half collapsed. You'd be buying a pretty significant problem. I can fix things, Marcus said. The words came out more defensive than he'd intended. It's also pretty isolated, Margaret continued, her tone suggesting she'd given this speech before. Nearest town is Ashford, about 40 minutes, and Ashford itself is only about 3,000 people. You'd be looking at real rural living. No restaurants, no shopping, no entertainment, just wind and prairie and not much else. That sounds perfect, Marcus said, and meant it. The idea of being somewhere no one knew him, no one could look at him with pity or judgment or that particular flavor of contempt reserved for men who'd failed at the basic task of providing for their families. That sounded like the closest thing to salvation he'd heard in months. Margaret sighed. Well, if you're sure, we can have the paperwork ready by end of week. You'll need to pay the back taxes in full before we can transfer the title. And sir, I really do have to emphasize this property needs extensive work. We're selling it as is for a reason. I understand, Marcus said. Do you have construction experience? Marcus almost laughed. 25 years. Built my own company. What happened to it? The question should have stung. Instead, Marcus found he was too tired for pain. Life, he said simply. They finished the call with arrangements for Marcus to wire the money and pick up the keys the following Friday. When he hung up, the truck felt smaller somehow, or maybe he felt bigger. For the first time in 6 months, he'd made a decision that wasn't just about surviving until tomorrow. He'd made a choice that implied a future. Now he just had to tell his daughter. The diner was neutral territory, Linda's rule. They met here once every 2 weeks, supervised visitation dressed up as lunch. Sophia usually spent the meal looking at her phone while Marcus tried to make conversation that didn't sound desperate or pleading. Today was different. Today Marcus had something to say that wasn't an apology or a promise he couldn't keep. Sophia walked in 15 minutes late, a small rebellion she'd perfected over the past 3 months. At 16, she'd grown taller than Linda, inherited her mother's sharp cheekbones and her grandmother's dark eyes. She'd also inherited something harder to name, a kind of armor that teenage girls developed when they'd been disappointed too many times. She slid into the booth across from Marcus without looking at him, her phone already in her hand. Hey, Soph, Marcus said. Hi. The word was automatic, empty of meaning. They ordered. Sophia got a salad she wouldn't finish. Marcus got coffee he didn't want. The waitress left with a sympathetic smile that made Marcus want to disappear into the vinyl booth. I wanted to talk to you about something, Marcus said. Sophia's thumbs continued moving across her phone screen. Okay, I'm moving. That got her attention. She looked up, her expression suspicious. Where? Kansas, I bought a ranch. Sophia stared at him. Then she laughed, sharp and bitter. You bought a ranch. You, who can't even afford an apartment, bought a ranch. It was $1, Marcus said. $1. Sophia's voice climbed. Dad, are you listening to yourself? This is insane. Even for you, this is insane. It needs work, Marcus admitted. A lot of work. But it's land, space, a chance to build something. Build something. Sophia set her phone down with enough force to make the silverware jump. Like you built a company? Like you built our family? How'd that work out? The words hit like hammers, each one finding the exact spot designed to cause maximum damage. Marcus absorbed them the way he'd learned to absorb all of Sophia's anger. Understanding that beneath the cruelty was grief for the father she'd thought she had. I know I've let you down, Marcus said quietly. Let me down? Sophia's eyes were bright now, not with tears but with fury. You didn't let me down, Dad. You gave up. When things got hard with the business, you just folded. And when Mom's lawyer started going after you, you barely even fought back. You just sat there and let them take everything. It wasn't that simple. It never is with you. Sophia grabbed her phone again, but her hands were shaking. So what? You're going to go play cowboy now? Live out some fantasy about being a rancher? I'm going to fix a place that's broken, Marcus said. I'm good at that. Or I used to be. Yeah, well, you're not good at sticking around when things get hard. Marcus took a breath. This was the moment. The ask that felt too big, too selfish, but also like the only thing that mattered. I want you to come with me, he said. The silence that followed was so complete, Marcus could hear the hum of the refrigerator behind the counter, the murmur of other diners, the tick of Sophia's phone timer counting down seconds of her life she'd never get back. You're joking, she said finally. You'd have your own room. There's a school in Ashford, the county seat. It's not Omaha, but it's a chance for both of us to start over. Start over. Sophia repeated the words like they were in a foreign language. Dad, I have friends here, a school I actually like, a life. You want me to give up everything to go live in the middle of nowhere with you in some dump that probably doesn't even have Wi-Fi? It'll have Wi-Fi, Marcus said, though he had no idea if that was true. No. Sophia stood up. I'm not doing this. I'm not leaving my entire life to watch you fail at something else. She walked out before the food arrived. Marcus sat alone in the booth, staring at the salad she'd ordered and the coffee growing cold in front of him. The waitress approached cautiously. Everything okay, hun? Marcus wanted to laugh. Instead, he just asked for the check. He was back in the truck, deciding whether to drive somewhere or just sleep here again, when his phone rang. Linda's name on the screen sent a familiar tightness through his chest. Hello. Sophia told me about Kansas, Linda said. No preamble. She'd perfected the art of making every word count. You want to take our daughter to live in some abandoned property you bought for $1. I'm not taking her anywhere she doesn't want to go. But you asked. Linda's voice carried an edge Marcus hadn't heard since the divorce. Marcus, what are you thinking? You can barely take care of yourself. Now you want to drag Sophia into whatever midlife crisis you're having? It's not a midlife crisis. It's a chance to build something stable. Stable? Linda laughed, but there was no humor in it. You lost our house, our business, our savings. And now you think buying a broken-down ranch for $1 is going to make you stable? Marcus closed his eyes. What do you want me to say, Linda? I want you to think about someone other than yourself for once. Sophia needs consistency. She needs structure. She doesn't need to be following her father to the middle of nowhere on some desperate scheme. Then why did you say yes? The question hung between them. Marcus could hear Linda breathing on the other end, could imagine her in the house that used to be theirs, standing in the kitchen where they'd made breakfast together for 20 years. Because, Linda said finally, her voice softer now, tired, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you do need this. And maybe, I don't know, maybe Sophia needs to see you try, even if you fail. I'm not going to fail. You always say that. Linda paused. She's coming home tomorrow. I'll talk to her. But Marcus, if you do this, if you take her out there, you better not quit. Not on the ranch, not on her, not this time. The call ended before Marcus could respond. Sophia showed up at the truck 2 days later. She didn't knock, just opened the passenger door and threw her duffel bag in the back seat. 2 bags, that was it. Her entire life condensed into 2 pieces of luggage. Mom says I have to come, she said, sliding into the passenger seat. Says you need supervision so you don't screw this up too. Marcus looked at his daughter. Her jaw was set, her eyes forward, every line of her body radiating resentment. But she was here. That had to count for something. Thank you, he said. Don't. Sophia put in her earbuds. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this because Mom needs a break from both of us. Soon as I turn 18, I'm gone. Marcus started the truck. Fair enough. The drive to Harper County took 6 hours. Sophia spent most of it staring out the window or at her phone, creating a wall of silence between them that felt as solid as concrete. Marcus tried a few times to start a conversation, pointing out landmarks, mentioning the town where they'd stop for gas, talking about his plans for the property. Sophia responded with grunts and monosyllables. By the 3rd hour, Marcus gave up. He focused on driving, watching the landscape flatten as Nebraska gave way to Kansas. The plains rolled past in endless waves of brown grass and gray sky, punctuated by the occasional farmhouse or grain elevator. It was beautiful in the way that vast, empty spaces were beautiful. It was also deeply, profoundly lonely. They reached Harper County as afternoon light turned everything gold. The GPS directed them off the highway onto county roads, then onto gravel roads that seemed to lead nowhere. Marcus kept checking the map, certain they'd made a wrong turn, but the blue dot kept insisting they were headed in the right direction. Then they saw it. The ranch appeared like a shipwreck emerging from fog. The house listed to the east at an angle that made Marcus's stomach drop. The porch sagged like a broken spine. Windows stared blank and black, some broken, others just empty. The roof showed gaps where shingles had surrendered to wind and time. Paint, if there had ever been any, had long since given up, leaving bare wood the color of old bones. The barn was worse. Half the structure had collapsed, timbers jutting at angles that defied physics. What remained standing looked like it was waiting for the next good wind to finish the job. Tumbleweeds had claimed the yard, piled against the foundation in drifts that looked almost like snow. The fence line had dissolved into a perimeter of tilted posts and rust, more suggestion than barrier. Marcus heard Sophia take in a breath. You've got to be kidding me, she said. Marcus stared at the house. In the photos, it had looked bad. In person, it looked like the physical manifestation of every mistake he'd ever made. It needs work, he said. Sophia opened her door and got out, moving with the slow deliberation of someone checking to see if what they were seeing was real. Marcus followed. The silence was enormous. No traffic sounds, no neighbors, no city hum, just wind moving through dry grass and the distant cry of a hawk. The isolation Marcus had craved in the abstract felt suddenly oppressive in the particular. "This is where you're going to build something," Sophia said. Not a question, an accusation. "Yes." She turned to look at him, and for a moment her armor cracked. He saw fear underneath. Fear in something that might have been hope if hope hadn't learned better. "Dad," she said, and her voice was very small, "what did you do?" Marcus didn't have an answer. They unloaded the truck as the sun set, painting the land in shades of copper and rust. Marcus had brought tools, a camp stove, sleeping bags rated for cold weather, LED lanterns, and not much else. Everything went into the house's front room, which at least had most of its roof intact. The inside was worse than the outside. Mice had made nests in every corner. Spider webs draped the beams like tattered curtains. The floor was covered in debris, dirt, and things Marcus didn't want to identify. The smell was mold and rot and abandonment. But the structure was sound. Marcus could see it in the way the walls met the floor, in the joins of the ceiling beams. Someone had built this place to last. They'd used real lumber and honest techniques. Under all the decay was a house that wanted to stand. Marcus spent 2 hours clearing out one room for Sophia. He hauled out trash in contractor bags, swept until the dust made his eyes water, grubbed surfaces with bleach and water until they were safe if not clean. He set up her bed, a frame and mattress he'd bought from a thrift store in Ashford on the way in, and helped her unpack her 2 bags while she radiated silent fury. "I hate this," she said when he was done. It was the first thing she'd said in an hour. "I know. I hate you for bringing me here." Marcus nodded. "I know that too." Sophia looked around the small room with its single window and bare walls and floor that still showed stains from decades of neglect. "Mom was right about you." She closed the door before Marcus could respond. He made his own space in an even smaller room, just enough for his cot and his tools. He laid in the darkness, listening to the house settle and creak, wondering if he'd made the biggest mistake of his life or the first right decision in years. Through the thin walls, he could hear Sophia crying. Marcus woke to footsteps on the porch. For a moment, disoriented in the pre-dawn darkness, he thought it might be Sophia leaving. Then he realized the footsteps were too slow, too measured. Someone else was here. He grabbed his flashlight and went to the front door. Through the broken window, he could see a figure standing at the edge of the porch. Small, bent with age, but there was something sharp in the way they held themselves. Marcus opened the door. The woman on his porch was ancient, 90 if she was a day, her back curved like a question mark, her hands gnarled as tree roots. But her eyes were bright and hard as chips of flint. "You're the fool who bought this place," she said. Not a question. "Yes, ma'am, Marcus Reid, Elena Cross." She didn't offer her hand. "I live a mile east." She looked past Marcus at the house, and something moved across her face. Pain or memory or both. "This was a good place once," she said, "before it all went wrong." "You knew the previous owners?" "Long time ago." Elena's eyes, still fixed on the house, seemed to be seeing something Marcus couldn't. "Before everything went to hell." Marcus waited. The old woman had the air of someone with more to say, but she was taking her time getting to it. "What brings a man all the way out here for $1 and a prayer?" she asked finally, turning those sharp eyes on him. "Fresh start," Marcus said. Elena nodded slowly. "Sometimes that's what a place offers. Sometimes it offers something else entirely." She turned to leave, then paused at the steps. "Word of advice, Mr. Reid. If you start finding things, old things, might be best to let them stay lost. Some history is better left buried." She walked away before Marcus could ask what she meant, disappearing into the morning twilight like smoke. Marcus stood on the broken porch and watched her go. The land opened around him in every direction, grass bending in waves that never stopped moving. Somewhere in the east, the sun was beginning to think about rising. And Marcus Reid, 52 years old, divorced, broke, and 1,000 miles from anywhere that mattered, wondered what the hell he was doing. Inside, he heard Sophia's door open. "Who was that?" she asked, her voice rough with sleep. "A neighbor, Elena Cross." Sophia appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a blanket against the cold. She looked younger like this, more like the girl who used to crawl into his lap when the thunderstorm scared her. "What did she want?" "To warn us, I think," Marcus said, "about finding things." "What things?" Marcus looked out at the ranch, at the collapsed barn and broken fence, and all the work waiting for him. "I don't know yet." The first week was brutal. Marcus worked 16-hour days trying to make the house habitable. He patched the roof where water had been getting in, He replaced broken windows with plywood until he could afford real glass. He got the well pump working again and nearly wept when actual water came out. He rigged a basic electrical system using a generator and LED lights. Sophia helped sometimes holding tools or steadying boards, but mostly she stayed in her room, living on her phone in the few hours when the generator was running to charge it. She spoke to Marcus only when necessary, each word rationed like ammunition. On the 8th day, Marcus decided to tackle the root cellar. It was accessible through a trap door in the kitchen, which itself was barely functional. Marcus had to move 50 years of accumulated debris just to find the door. When he finally got it open, the smell that emerged made his eyes water. The cellar was dark and deep and full of cobwebs. Marcus descended carefully, testing each rung of the ladder. At the bottom, his flashlight revealed a space about 12 by 12, lined with old stone. Shelves lined one wall, empty except for dust and mouse droppings. He was about to give up and head back up when his light caught something in the far corner. A section of floor that looked different, cleaner maybe, or more deliberate. Marcus cleared away the dirt and found a trap door, smaller than the one above, set flush with the floor. It had an iron ring for a handle, rusted but intact. He pulled. The door was heavy, built to last. But it opened. Below was a space just deep enough to hide something. And hidden there, wrapped in oilcloth and sealed with wax, was an iron box. Marcus lifted it carefully. The metal was cold, heavy with age and secrets. Rust had claimed the corners, but the lock remained intact. He carried it up into the fading afternoon light and set it on the splintered porch. His hands trembled as he worked the lock with a pry bar. It resisted, then gave with a snap that seemed too loud in the silence. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth gone brittle with time, lay pieces of someone else's life. A leather journal, its pages yellowed and fragile. Photographs faded to sepia tones showing faces Marcus didn't recognize. Military medals, Bronze Star, Purple Heart, their ribbons still bright despite the years. Legal documents, creased from repeated folding. And beneath it all, a bundle of letters tied with twine. Marcus picked up the journal first. The leather cracked under his touch, releasing the smell of old paper and dust and something else. The particular scent of a life preserved. On the first page, written in careful script, property of William Cross, 1952. The name meant nothing to Marcus, but the date did. 70 years ago, someone had hidden this box with care and intention. The question was why. He heard the truck door slam. Sophia emerged from the cab where she'd been charging her phone and doing homework. She crossed the dirt yard without looking at him, but paused when she saw what he was holding. "What's that?" she asked. "Found it in the root cellar," Marcus said. "Looks like it belonged to the man who owned this place." Sophia came closer, curiosity overcoming resentment for a moment. She looked at the journal, the photographs, the letters. "Why would someone hide all this?" "I don't know," Marcus said, "but I think we should find out." As the sun set over the Kansas plains, Marcus Reid opened William Cross's journal and began to read. And in reading, he found the first piece of a story that would change everything. The journal felt fragile in Marcus's hands, like something that might disintegrate if he breathed wrong. He sat on the porch as darkness settled over the land, the LED lantern casting harsh shadows across pages that had waited 70 years to be read. Sophia appeared beside him without announcement, settling onto the warped boards with her arms wrapped around her knees. She didn't ask permission, just sat and waited. Marcus opened to the first entry. March 15th, 1952. The handwriting was precise. The script of a man educated in an era when penmanship mattered. Started the partnership with James today. Signed the papers in town. Split everything 50-50 like we agreed. James says we're going to build an empire out here. Says the land has potential most folks can't see. I believe him. He's got vision, that one. Together, we're going to make this ranch something special. The optimism in those words hit Marcus like a fist. He recognized that tone. The certainty of a man who believed hard work and fair dealing were enough. Who thought the future was something you could build with your hands and your word. Marcus had felt that way once. He flipped through more pages. Entries about cattle purchases, fence repairs, water rights negotiations. The mundane accounting of building something from nothing. But as the dates progressed, the tone shifted. June 3rd, 1953. Found some discrepancies in the cattle count. James says it's just sloppy record keeping, but I counted twice. We're short at least 20 head from what the books show. July 18th. James has been taking trips to the city, says he's meeting investors, setting up sales channels. Won't give me much detail, says I should trust him on the business end while I focus on the ranch work. August 2nd, confronted James about the missing cattle. He got angry, said I was questioning his integrity. Maybe I am, but something's not right. Money's going out that doesn't match what's coming in. Marcus looked up from the journal. The open land surrounded them, dark and vast, empty of everything except wind and the cry of something distant. Probably a coyote. What does it say? Sophia asked. Her voice was quiet, stripped of its usual armor. A man who trusted the wrong person, Marcus said, got betrayed by his partner. Sophia was silent for a moment. Like you. Marcus nodded. Yeah, like me. They sat together as full darkness came, and Marcus read on. The entries grew darker, more worried. William Cross had discovered something serious, something worth documenting in careful detail. But the journal ended abruptly, mid-entry, as if William had been interrupted and never returned. October 12th, 1953. Tomorrow I confront James with everything I've found. I have the proof now, documentation he can't explain away. If he won't make this right, I'll take it to the authorities. This is still my ranch too, still my name on the partnership. I won't let him steal what we built. Elena thinks I should be careful, says James has got a temper when he's cornered. But what else can I do? A man has to stand up for what's right, even when it costs him. The entry ended there. No signature, no final thoughts. Just an abrupt stop like a sentence cut short. Who's Elena? Sophia asked. Marcus thought of the old woman who'd appeared at dawn, warning him about finding things, telling him some history was better left buried. I think, he said slowly, I think she might be someone who knew what happened here. The next morning, Marcus started clearing the root cellar properly. If there was one hidden compartment, there might be others. Sophia surprised him by helping, the two of them working in the close quarters without speaking much, finding a rhythm that felt almost comfortable. Around noon, Marcus's pry bar hit something that didn't sound like wood or stone. He cleared away more debris and found what he was looking for. A pocket watch, wedged between floorboards near the back wall. It was silver, tarnished black in places, but still intact. The kind men carried in the days before wristwatches became standard. Marcus worked it free carefully, using the pry bar to lift the board edge just enough. He rubbed the face with his thumb, clearing away grime. The hands had stopped at 3:47. Morning or evening, there was no way to know. He turned it over. On the back, an engraving. W.C. to J.B., brothers in arms. William Cross to James Brennan, the partner, the thief. Why would a gift from William to James end up wedged in the cellar floorboards? Marcus asked aloud. Sophia took the watch from him, examining the inscription. Maybe James dropped it. Maybe there was a fight down here. Marcus thought about that. A fight. A confrontation. William discovering the theft. James getting violent. The watch falling in the struggle. Getting kicked under the boards. Forgotten in whatever came next. He slipped the watch into his pocket and continued searching, but found nothing else. Just old wood and older stone in the accumulated debris of 70 years. That afternoon, Elena Cross appeared again. She walked the property line like it was a border that couldn't be crossed without permission, waiting for Marcus to notice her. When he did, he waved her over. Mrs. Cross, can I offer you some water? Coffee? Water's fine. She followed him to the porch, moving with the careful steps of someone whose bones hurt, but whose pride wouldn't acknowledge it. Marcus brought out 2 glasses and sat beside her. They drank in silence for a moment, watching the grass bend under wind that never stopped. Found something today? Marcus said, pulling out the watch. Thought you might know something about it. Elena took the watch and the color drained from her face. Her hands trembled as she turned it over, reading the inscription. Where did you find this? Her voice was barely above a whisper. Cellar, wedged between floorboards. Elena stared at the watch like it was a snake that might strike. William gave this to James on the day they signed their partnership, she said finally. I remember because William was so proud, so sure he'd found a good man to build something with. She handed the watch back like it burned to hold. You should put this away, Mr. Reid. Forget you found it. Why? Because some stones are better left unturned. What happened here, Mrs. Cross? Elena stood, steadying herself against the porch rail. The movement seemed to age her another decade. William Cross disappeared in October of '53, she said. Her voice had gone flat, reciting facts like reading from a phone book. Left his truck, his belongings, everything. James Brennan said William ran off with money from the ranch accounts. said he'd been skimming profits and finally got scared when James caught on. You don't believe that? Doesn't matter what I believe. That's the story that went into the records, the story the town accepted. But the watch proves nothing, Marcus said, except it ended up in a cellar. James Brennan claimed William gave him the watch back. Elena's voice was sharp now, defensive. Said it was conscience money before he ran. Could have dropped it during a visit here. Could have a dozen explanations. Marcus felt a chill run through him, or William never left at all. The words hung between them. Elena's face hardened. You need to understand something, Mr. Reid. James Brennan died 30 years ago, but his family didn't. His grandson, Cole Brennan, owns half this county. The bank, the feed store, sits on the county commission. The Brennans have deep roots here. You start making accusations about things that happened before you were born, you'll make powerful enemies. I'm not looking to make enemies. Then understand this. Elena's eyes were fierce now. I've lived here 70 years. I knew William. I knew James. And I'm telling you, for your own good and your daughter's, let sleeping dogs lie. She left then, moving faster than Marcus would have thought possible for someone her age. He watched her go, the watch still in his hand. That evening, Sophia came out to the porch where Marcus sat looking at William's journal again. That old woman seemed upset, Sophia said. Yeah, showed her something I found. Marcus held up the watch. It belonged to the man who used to own this place. Sophia took it, examining the inscription. Brothers in arms, like soldiers, like partners, or what they thought was a partnership. What happened to him? Marcus told her then. About William and James, about the journal entries and the missing cattle and the confrontation that was planned but apparently never happened. About how William disappeared and was never seen again. So his partner killed him, Sophia said. Her voice was matter-of-fact, the way teenagers talk about distant tragedies that don't touch their own lives. Maybe, or maybe he really did run away. But Mrs. Cross says his truck was still here, his belongings. People don't usually run away from their lives without taking their truck. Sophia turned the watch over in her hands. Why do you care? It's not your problem. Marcus thought about that. Why did he care? William Cross was a stranger, dead or vanished 70 years ago. It had nothing to do with rebuilding a ranch or making a home for his daughter. Because reading his journal feels like reading my own story, Marcus said slowly. A man who trusted someone, who got betrayed, who tried to stand up for what was right and paid a price for it. Sophia looked at him, really looked at him, and Marcus saw his daughter considering whether her father's failures had been entirely his fault or if he'd been cheated same as William. What are you going to do? She asked. I don't know yet. Mrs. Cross says I should leave it alone. Do you always do what old ladies tell you? Marcus almost smiled. Usually not. Sophia handed back the watch and went inside. But something had shifted. For the first time since Omaha, she'd asked him a question that wasn't loaded with contempt. She'd listened to his answer like it mattered. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He lay on his cot listening to the house creak, thinking about William Cross and James Brennan and a watch that had stopped at 3:47. He thought about Elena's warning and the fear in her eyes when she'd seen the watch. He thought about powerful families and old secrets and whether truth mattered after 70 years. Around midnight, he got up and lit the lantern. He went back to the lockbox and examined everything again. The journal, the photographs, the medals, the documents. He laid it all out on the floor like pieces of a puzzle. One photograph caught his attention. William and James, younger, standing in front of the barn when it was new, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera. Brothers in arms indeed. Before the betrayal, before the theft, before whatever happened that made William disappear and James inherit everything. Marcus studied James Brennan's face in the photograph. A handsome man, confident, the kind of person you'd trust. The kind of person who could smile at you while planning how to take everything you had. He picked up the journal and read the final entry again. William had proof, documentation that James couldn't explain away. He'd planned to confront James and, if necessary, go to the authorities. But the journal ended there and William disappeared. And somehow James Brennan ended up with the ranch, the business, everything. Marcus thought about the cellar where he'd found the watch, about how the lockbox had been hidden so carefully, about how a man planning to run away doesn't hide evidence. He takes it with him. The pieces began to form a picture Marcus didn't like but couldn't ignore. William Cross hadn't run away. He'd been silenced. And 70 years later, his story was still trapped in an iron lockbox, waiting for someone to care enough to listen. Marcus looked towards Sophia's room, where his daughter slept behind a closed door. He thought about powerful families and the dangers of asking questions nobody wanted answered. He thought about Elena's warning and knew she was right. Pursuing this could bring trouble. But he also thought about a man who'd stood up for what was right and paid the ultimate price. About a story that deserved to be told, even if telling it was inconvenient or dangerous. For the first time since the divorce, Marcus felt something other than defeat. He felt purpose. Maybe it was borrowed purpose, standing in for a dead man's fight, but it was something to hold on to, something that mattered beyond just surviving one more day. He gathered the lockbox contents carefully and placed them in the corner of his room. Tomorrow he'd start asking real questions. He'd find out what happened to William Cross, why James Brennan's watch ended up in a cellar, and whether justice could reach across 70 years. The watch sat on his makeshift nightstand, its hands forever frozen at 3:47. Marcus looked at it one last time before blowing out the lantern. "Brothers in arms," the inscription said. But brother had betrayed brother, and the evidence was still here, still waiting, still demanding someone give a damn. Marcus closed his eyes and for the first time in months, slept without the weight of his own failures crushing his chest. He had someone else's fight to take up, and maybe in fighting for a dead man's honor, he'd find a way to reclaim his own. The morning brought Frank Hodges. Marcus was working on replacing rotted porch boards when the truck pulled up. An old Chevy, well-maintained, driven by a man who looked to be in his late 60s with the bearing of someone who'd spent a lifetime in uniform. He got out slowly, taking in the ranch with eyes that had seen it before. "You're the one who bought the Cross place," he said. Not a question. "Marcus Reid." Marcus set down his hammer and came down off the porch. "Frank Hodges, retired sheriff's deputy." Frank extended his hand. His grip was firm, the handshake of a man who believed such things still mattered. "Heard you've been asking questions about William Cross." Marcus felt his guard go up. "Just trying to understand the history of my property." "Mind if we talk?" Frank gestured to his truck. "Somewhere private." They sat in Frank's cab with the windows down, the open land stretching empty around them. Frank pulled out a thermos of coffee and poured 2 cups without asking if Marcus wanted any. "I was deputy sheriff in '53, Frank said, 22 years old. William Cross disappeared. James Brennan reported he'd run off with partnership money. You didn't believe it." Frank took a long drink of coffee. "I thought something was wrong. William's truck was still at the ranch. His clothes, wedding ring, his fiancée said he never took it off. What man runs away without his truck? Why didn't you investigate?" Frank's expression tightened. "Sheriff at the time was Earl Brennan, James's first cousin. He told me to drop it or find another job. I was young, needed the work. I dropped it." The bitterness in Frank's voice was old and deep, like a wound that had never quite healed. "I've lived with that every day," Frank said. "Knowing I failed William Cross, failed his girl. That's why I retired early. Couldn't look in the mirror anymore." "Why are you telling me this?" Frank looked at Marcus directly. "Because you've got a chance I didn't have. Statute of limitations is long gone on any criminal charges. But the truth doesn't have a statute of limitations. If you're willing to dig, I'll help you dig." Marcus felt something shift. This wasn't just his fight anymore. "What do you know about James Brennan?" "He was slick," Frank said. "Charming. The kind of man who could sell ice to Eskimos." After William disappeared, James took over the whole operation, claimed he tried to save it, but the debts were too deep. Lost the ranch to foreclosure 6 months later. "Let me guess. He was the only bidder at the auction." Frank nodded. "Bought it for $6,000. Property was worth at least 20. Then he sold it 2 years later for 40 and started buying up other properties. Built himself quite an empire on that seed money. Money he stole from William. Money he stole, ranch he murdered for." Frank set down his coffee cup. "That's what I think anyway. Can't prove it. Never could." Marcus pulled out the watch and showed it to Frank. The old man's eyes widened. "That's William's watch. The one he gave James. Where'd you find it?" "Cellar, hidden under the floorboards." Frank turned the watch over, reading the inscription. "Brothers in arms, Jesus." "You know what this means?" "That something happened in that cellar. That James was here in this house, probably the day William disappeared. And the watch ended up hidden like evidence." Frank looked up at Marcus. "This is good. This is real. But we need more. We need to find what William was planning to show James, the proof he mentioned in his journal." Over the next week, Marcus and Frank searched the property systematically. Sophia joined them after school, the 3 of them working together in a way that felt like what a family should be. Marcus showed Frank the journal, read him the final entries. Frank's face went gray as he listened to William's words from beyond the grave. He knew, Frank said. He knew James might kill him. That's why he hid the lockbox. They searched the barn foundation, the old fence posts, anywhere a man might hide something he needed kept safe. On the fourth day, Sophia found it. She'd been working along the barn foundation, pulling away weeds and accumulated debris, when she called out. Marcus and Frank came running. Sophia had found a section where 3 foundation stones sat slightly recessed from the others. The mortar around them looked different, lighter in color, not as weathered. Together they worked the stones loose. Behind them, wrapped in oilcloth and sealed with wax, was a metal tube about 18 inches long. Marcus's hands trembled as he opened it. Inside, rolled tight, was a document. He spread it carefully on the ground. It was a notarized statement dated October 10th, 1953, 2 days before William's final journal entry. I, William Cross, being of sound mind, make this statement as a matter of legal record. My business partner, James Brennan, has been systematically stealing from our joint cattle operation. Over the past 18 months, he has engaged in the following fraudulent activities. What followed was a detailed accounting. False cattle sales where James kept the money, diverted payments from buyers, forged invoices showing expenses that never existed. Each allegation included dates, amounts, and names of witnesses who could corroborate. Should my death or disappearance occur under suspicious circumstances? The statement concluded, I ask that authorities investigate James Brennan thoroughly. I have hidden copies of financial records and correspondence in multiple locations on this property. The truth is here for those willing to look. The statement was notarized by a clerk in the state capitol, someone outside James's sphere of influence. Frank read it twice. This is it. This proves James was stealing, proves William knew and was going to expose him. But it's circumstantial, Marcus said. It's William's word against James's, and William's the one who disappeared. Sophia, who'd been examining the tube more carefully, held up a small folded paper that had been tucked in the end. There's more. Marcus opened it. It was a hand-drawn map of the property, dated 1952. But unlike a normal property map, this one showed unusual detail. Underground water channels, mineral deposit indicators, areas marked with survey stakes. In the corner, in William's handwriting, true value of the land, JB knows but won't discuss. Weimar. Marcus studied the map. Whoever had surveyed this property had found something valuable underground. The map showed what looked like significant water rights and possible mineral deposits. Look, Sophia pointed to several areas marked private, JB only. James was surveying parts of the property without William's knowledge, Marcus said slowly, probably planning to claim the mineral and water rights for himself. Frank pulled out his phone and searched for the county assessor's information. He navigated through several screens before finding what he needed. Current ownership records for mineral and water rights on the Old Cross property. The rights had been severed from the surface property decades ago. They were held by a company called Brennan Resources, LLC. Of course, Marcus muttered. What? Sophia asked. The mineral and water rights. They're owned by a company with Brennan in the name. I'd bet anything it's connected to James's family. Frank scrolled through the information. It says here the rights were registered in 1954, right after the property was seized. He stopped, his eyes widening. Marcus, current value estimate. It says $600,000. Marcus felt ice settle in his veins. James hadn't just stolen from the partnership. He'd orchestrated William's disappearance to claim underground resources worth a fortune. 70 years later, his family was still profiting from murder. That evening, Marcus called the only lawyer he could find in Ashford. Rachel Foster's office was above a hardware store accessed by exterior stairs. She agreed to see him the next morning. Rachel was younger than Marcus expected, maybe 40, with sharp eyes and a direct handshake. She listened as Marcus spread out the documents on her desk. The partnership agreement, William's notarized statement, the property map, the records of the seizure and sale. She read through everything carefully, making notes. When she finished, she sat back. This is remarkable, she said. If authentic, and it looks authentic, this suggests significant fraud in a 1950s property seizure. Can we do anything about it? Marcus asked. It's complicated. The statute of limitations has long passed on most criminal charges, but there might be grounds for a civil action regarding the property rights. If the seizure was fraudulent, subsequent transfers of mineral and water rights could be challenged. What would that take? Rachel's expression was sympathetic. More evidence. What you have establishes motive and opportunity, but you'd need proof that James Brennan was directly involved in William Cross's disappearance. A body would help. Or witness testimony, Frank said quietly. After 70 years? Rachel shook her head. I know it's hard, but here's what I can do. I can research the legal angles. See if there's a pathway to challenge the rights transfer. Meanwhile, you keep looking for evidence. Talk to old-timers who might remember something. The more you can build the case, the harder it becomes to dismiss. Marcus nodded. There's something else. William said he hid evidence in multiple locations. We found this in the barn foundation. There might be more. Then find it, Rachel said. And Mr. Reid, be careful. The Brennan family has deep roots here. They're not going to appreciate someone digging into their past. If you start making progress, expect pushback. As they left the office, Sophia was quiet. Marcus could feel her thinking. What is it? He asked. We're really doing this, she said. We're going up against a powerful family to prove a 70-year-old murder. Having second thoughts? Sophia met his eyes. No, I'm thinking this is the first time I've seen you stand up for something. Really stand up. Consequences be damned. Marcus put his hand on his daughter's shoulder. For the first time, she didn't pull away. They had a lawyer. They had evidence. They had purpose. Tomorrow, they'd search for more hidden proof. Tonight, Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in years. The conviction that he was doing something right. Something that mattered. William Cross's voice echoed across 7 decades, asking for justice. And Marcus Reid, failed businessman and broken father, had found his chance at redemption. Over the next days, Marcus, Sophia, and Frank searched every corner of the property. The work was hard and the weather was turning cold, but they kept at it. They found nothing in the obvious places, but Marcus couldn't shake the feeling they were missing something. Then Marcus remembered William's statement. I have hidden copies of financial records and correspondence in multiple locations on this property. The house itself, they'd been searching outbuildings, but not the house properly. They spent an afternoon taking the house apart methodically, behind baseboards, under floorboards, in the attic, between wall studs where they could access them. Hours of work yielded nothing but dust and mouse droppings. Marcus was about to give up when Sophia called from the kitchen. Dad, this wall sounds different. She was tapping on the wall beside the old chimney. Most of the wall gave back a solid thunk, but one section sounded hollow. Marcus examined it carefully. The plaster was original, painted over many times, but there, barely visible, was a seam. Someone had cut a section of the wall and replastered it. He fetched a hammer and carefully broke through the plaster. Behind it, in a cavity between the wall studs, was a metal box. Inside were financial records, ledgers showing the real cattle sales versus what James had reported, receipts for expenses that had never been incurred, bank statements from an account in James's name only, containing money that should have been partnership income. This is what William meant about documentation, Marcus said, leafing through the pages. These prove exactly how James was stealing. Dates, amounts, methods. There was also a photograph. William and a woman, and younger than in the other photos Marcus had seen. They were standing by the house, and the woman wore what looked like an engagement ring. Marcus turned the photo over. In William's handwriting, Elena and me, August 1953. Wedding planned for November. Elena, the neighbor who'd warned him to let sleeping dogs lie. Elena Cross, Sophia said, reading over his shoulder. She was William's fiancée. Marcus felt understanding flood through him. She's been here the whole time. 70 years watching the ranch fall apart, waiting. Why didn't she say anything? Fear, Marcus thought. Or no proof. Or maybe, and this was the thought that kept him staring at the photo, maybe Elena had recognized that her fiancé needed something she couldn't provide. She needed the right person to find what William had hidden. We need to talk to her, Marcus said. They drove to Elena's small house a mile down the road. She answered the door slowly, her face showing no surprise at seeing them. You found more, she said. Not a question. Marcus showed her the financial records and the photograph. You and William. Elena's eyes filled with tears. She stepped aside to let them in. Her living room was sparse but neat. On the mantel, Marcus saw more photographs. William as a young man, William in uniform, William on the ranch. 70 years of keeping vigil for a man who'd never come home. I knew you'd find it eventually, Elena said, settling into a chair. William was thorough. He knew James might kill him. He prepared. Why didn't you tell us from the start? Sophia asked. Would you have believed an old woman's story? Or would you have thought I was crazy, still holding on to ancient grief? Elena shook her head. No, I needed you to find the evidence yourselves. Needed you to care enough to dig. You've known all along, Marcus said, about the murder, about everything. Elena looked at him steadily. William came to me the night before he disappeared, told me about the meeting at the well, made me promise if anything happened, to watch over the evidence he'd hidden, to wait for someone worthy to find it. 70 years, Sophia whispered. 70 years I've kept that promise, Elena said. Watched the ranch decay, watched the Brennan family prosper on what they'd stolen. Waited for someone who'd give a damn about an old injustice. She looked at Marcus. That's why I arranged for you to buy the place. The pieces fell into place. The $1 listing, the specific timing. Elena had orchestrated everything. You own the ranch, Marcus said. Elena smiled, thin and sad. Through a trust. I never claimed it openly. James's people would have destroyed me. But I kept the tax payments current through intermediaries. Kept it available for when the right person came along. Why me? I researched you, saw a good man beaten down by betrayal, trying to be better for his daughter. Saw someone who understood what William went through. She looked at Sophia, and I saw a girl who needed her father to fight for something. Marcus felt manipulated and honored in equal measure. Elena had stage managed this entire journey, but for the right reasons. Cole Brennan won't take this well, Marcus said. He's already nervous. If he knows we found this much evidence. He's afraid, Elena said. His whole empire is built on what James stole. If the truth comes out, if the property seizure is proven fraudulent, the Brennan family loses everything. Reputation, wealth, power. Good, Sophia said fiercely. Elena reached into a drawer and pulled out a cassette tape, old and worn. William gave me this the night before he died. His voice describing everything. The threats, the meeting James arranged, his fear that he wouldn't survive. I've kept it safe all these years, waiting for the right moment. She handed the tape to Marcus. Evidence from beyond the grave, William's own testimony preserved in magnetic oxide. There's more, Elena said. I know where William's body is. I've always known. The words hung in the air between them. Elena's face was pale but determined. The face of someone who'd carried a terrible secret for so long that releasing it felt like surrender and relief in equal measure. You know where he is, Marcus repeated. In the well where James put him, Elena said. 70 years ago. The words hung in the air like smoke from a gun that had been fired 70 years ago. Elena Cross sat in her living room, surrounded by photographs of a man who'd never grown old, and told them where his body lay. The old well, she said again, her voice steady now that the secret was finally being spoken aloud. Northeast corner of the property, about half a mile from the house. James sealed it with concrete the day after William disappeared. Marcus felt the room tilt slightly. You've known all this time. I went there, Elena said. Her eyes were distant, seeing something from decades past. 3 days after William didn't come home. It was late at night, I couldn't sleep. Something drew me out there. The area around the well had been disturbed, fresh dirt, and the well that had been opened was sealed with new concrete, still wet in places. You saw it, Sophia whispered. I saw it, and I knew. Elena's hands trembled in her lap. She folded them together, the gesture of someone who'd practiced control for so long it had become automatic. But what could I do? Tell the sheriff? Earl Brennan was James's cousin. He'd already told me William had run off, that I should accept it and move on. A young woman against a powerful man. I would have ended up in that well too. Frank Hodges had been silent through all of this, but now he spoke. I should have pushed harder, should have investigated properly. You were 22, Elena said, and Earl Brennan would have destroyed you. Don't carry that guilt, Frank. I've carried enough for both of us. Marcus stood and walked to the window. Outside, the prairie stretched empty under a sky that promised rain. Somewhere out there, half a mile from the house he now owned, was a grave that had waited 7 decades to be opened. We need to find it, he said. I can show you, Elena replied. I've walked past it 1,000 times over the years. Watched the concrete weather and crack. Watched weeds grow around it. Waited for this day. They left Elena's house as the first drops of rain began to fall. Frank drove, Elena in the passenger seat, directing him down roads that had become paths. Paths that had become suggestions in the grass. Marcus and Sophia followed in the truck, windshield wipers fighting against the downpour. The rain came harder, turning the dirt roads to mud. Frank's truck slipped and slid, but he kept going. Elena sat forward in her seat, one hand on the dashboard, the other pointing the way. There, she said finally. Stop here. They got out into the rain. It soaked through Marcus's jacket in seconds, plastered his hair to his skull, ran down his face like tears. But he barely felt it. His eyes were fixed on what Elena was pointing at. A depression in the land, subtle, easy to miss if you didn't know to look for it. And in the center of that depression, nearly hidden by grass and decades of accumulated dirt, a concrete cap. They approached slowly, reverently. This wasn't just evidence anymore. It was a grave. Marcus knelt beside the cap and began pulling away the grass. Sophia joined him without being asked. Frank, too. Even Elena, 93 years old and bent with age, got down on her knees in the mud and helped clear away the earth. Gradually, the concrete emerged, 6 feet across, weathered and cracked, but intact. And there, cast into the surface in letters that 70 years of Kansas weather hadn't quite erased. Words that made Marcus's blood run cold. Brennan Construction, 1953. He signed his work, Frank said, his voice barely audible over the rain. The arrogant son of a bitch signed his work. Marcus ran his fingers over the letters. James Brennan had sealed his partner in this hole and marked it with his company name. The sheer audacity of it, the contempt it showed for William's life and Elena's grief, made something hot and angry rise in Marcus's chest. We need to call someone, he said, pulling out his phone. The state investigators, the attorney general, someone who can make this official. No signal out here, Frank said, checking his own phone. We'll have to drive back to town. I'll stay, Elena said. I've waited 70 years. I can wait a few more hours. Mrs. Cross, it's pouring rain, Sophia said. You'll get sick. Elena looked at her with eyes that had seen too much and endured too long. I made William a promise that I'd be here when they brought him home. I'm keeping that promise. Marcus wanted to argue, but something in Elena's face stopped him. This was her vigil, her witness. Who was he to deny her that? I'll stay too, he said. Frank nodded. Sophia and I will drive to town. Call Rachel, call the state police, get everyone moving. You two stay here, make sure nobody disturbs the site. After they left, Marcus and Elena sat in his truck with the engine running for heat. The rain hammered the roof. The wipers swept back and forth. And through the windshield, they could see the concrete cap, marking a grave that shouldn't exist. Tell me about him, Marcus said. About William. Elena was quiet for a long moment. Then she began to speak, her voice soft but clear. He was kind, she said. That's what I remember most. In a hard world, in a hard time, William Cross was kind. He saw me at the county fair in '52. I was teaching school, living with my parents, trying to save money. He walked right up to me and said, "You have the most honest face I've ever seen." She smiled at the memory. We were married less than a year later, in secret, because William wanted to settle things with James first, wanted to start our marriage with everything clean and clear. He was like that, believed in doing things the right way. He sounds like a good man. He was the best man I ever knew. Elena's voice broke slightly. And James Brennan killed him because he wouldn't look the other way. Because he had the courage to stand up and say, this is wrong. Marcus thought about that, about a man who could have taken his share and stayed silent, who could have let the theft continue and lived in comfort. But William Cross had stood up, had said no, had paid for his integrity with his life. I've been a coward, Marcus said, not to Elena specifically, just speaking the truth aloud. When Linda's lawyer came after me, when they took everything, I just let it happen. Didn't fight, didn't stand up, just accepted it. You were tired, Elena said. Beaten down, there's no shame in that. William was probably tired too, but he fought anyway. Elena turned to look at him. You're fighting now, for a man you never met, for a truth that doesn't benefit you. That takes a different kind of courage. They sat in silence after that, watching the rain and waiting. An hour passed, then 2. The rain began to ease, becoming drizzle, then mist. The sky lightened from black to gray. That's when they heard the vehicles. Marcus looked in the rearview mirror and saw them coming, not from the direction Frank and Sophia had gone, from the other way. 3 trucks, big and new and moving fast despite the mud. That's not the police, Marcus said. The truck stopped in a line, blocking the path back to the main road. Doors opened. Men got out, 6 of them, big and hard-looking. And from the lead truck, a man Marcus recognized from the photos he'd found in William's lockbox. Older now, silver hair and expensive clothes. But the same confident bearing, the same face that smiled while planning betrayal. Cole Brennan. Marcus got out of his truck. The ground was slick under his boots. Rain dripped from the brim of his hat. He positioned himself between Cole's men and the well. Cole approached alone, hands in the pockets of a jacket that probably cost more than Marcus made in a month. His expression was calm, almost friendly, but his eyes were calculating. "Mr. Reid," he said, "we need to talk." "Nothing to talk about." "I think there is." Cole glanced past Marcus at the concrete cap. "That's private property, mineral rights, my property. This well is on the surface land, my property. The mineral rights include access to historical water sources." Cole's voice was smooth, practiced, the tone of a man who'd won arguments through sheer confidence. "Which means anything you found here, any claims you think you can make, are legally questionable at best." "Your grandfather murdered William Cross," Marcus said. "Sealed him in this well. That's not legally questionable, that's murder. My grandfather has been dead 30 years. You're making accusations against a man who can't defend himself based on, what, some old letters, a watch, circumstantial nonsense. We have William's notarized statement, his financial records, and we have this." Marcus gestured at the cap. "With your grandfather's company name cast right into it, dated 1953, the same year William disappeared." Something flickered across Cole's face. Not quite fear, but close. "You have theories, not proof." "Then why are you here?" Marcus asked. "If we don't have proof, if this is all nonsense, why bring 6 men out here in the rain?" Cole's jaw tightened. The friendly mask slipped, revealing something harder underneath. "I'm trying to do this the civilized way. I'm offering you money. A lot of money. Enough to rebuild your life. Take your daughter somewhere nice. Start over properly." "How much?" $50,000 cash today. It was more money than Marcus had seen in a year. Enough to leave Kansas, find a real place to live, give Sophia the stability she deserved. He could walk away from this fight that wasn't his, from a 70-year-old murder, from the dangers of going up against a powerful family. He could be smart, be safe, be a good father. Marcus looked back at the well, at the concrete cap with Brennan Construction stamped into it, at the grave of a man who'd chosen integrity over safety. "No," he said. "Mr. Reid, I don't think you understand the position you're in." "I understand perfectly. Your grandfather was a thief and a murderer. You've built an empire on what he stole, and now that empire is about to come down." Cole's expression went cold. He took a step closer, and his men shifted, moving into position, surrounding Marcus. "Let me be very clear," Cole said, his voice low and dangerous. "If you continue this, I will destroy you. I'll tie you up in legal battles for years. I'll make sure you can't get about, can't get credit, can't function in this county, and your daughter will suffer for your stubbornness." Marcus felt anger surge through him, hot and clean and righteous. "You threatening my daughter? I'm telling you the reality of fighting people who have power." The nearest of Cole's men took a step toward Marcus. Big guy, probably 6'3", hands like hammers. Marcus recognized the type. Muscle hired to intimidate. And Marcus was done being intimidated. He'd been pushed around by lawyers and judges in a system that favored the ruthless. He'd been made to feel small and weak and worthless. But he was 52 years old, had spent 30 years swinging hammers and carrying lumber, and doing the kind of work that built real strength. When the big guy reached for him, Marcus moved. He stepped inside the grab, drove his shoulder into the man's solar plexus, felt the breath go out in a whoosh. The guy staggered back, surprised. Marcus didn't give him time to recover. He brought his fist up in a short, hard arc that connected with the man's jaw. The guy went down. The other men rushed forward. Marcus got his hands up, blocked a punch, took another one to the ribs that drove the air from his lungs. He swung back, connected with something soft. Someone grabbed him from behind. Then Frank Hodges was there. The old sheriff's deputy moved like he'd done this before, like the years had stripped away, but the training remained. He caught one of Cole's men with an elbow to the face, spun, and drove a knee into another's gut. The fight broke apart as quickly as it had started. Cole's men backed off, breathing hard, reassessing. One was on the ground holding his jaw. Another had blood streaming from his nose. And into the sudden silence came the sound of sirens. 3 state police vehicles came down the muddy road, lights flashing. Behind them, 2 more trucks. Crime scene units, Marcus guessed. The cavalry had arrived. Cole Brennan stood very still, watching his moment of control evaporate. His men backed away, hands visible, trying to look like they hadn't just been in a fight. The police got out. The lead officer, a woman in her 40s with the bearing of someone who'd seen everything and believed nothing, took in the scene with one sweep of her eye. "I'm Lieutenant Sarah Chen," she said. "Someone want to tell me what's going on here?" Marcus pointed at the concrete cap. "There's a body in that well. William Cross. Been there since 1953. And that man," he pointed at Cole, "his grandfather put him there." Lieutenant Chen looked at Cole. "That true, Mr. Brennan?" "Of course not. This man has been harassing my family with baseless accusations. We came here to ask him to stop." "With 6 guys?" Chen raised an eyebrow. "That's quite the asking party. We were concerned for our safety." "Uh-huh." Chen turned to her officers. "Secure the scene. Nobody touches that cap until our forensic team gets here. And I want statements from everyone." She looked at Cole's men, at the ones still on the ground, at Frank's bloody knuckles. "Especially about whatever happened before we got here." Cole's lawyer arrived 20 minutes later. Sharp suit, expensive briefcase, the look of a shark that smelled blood in the water. He immediately started talking about property rights, about illegal searches, about harassment of his client. Chen listened with the patience of someone who'd heard it all before. Then she held up a piece of paper. "This is a warrant," she said, "signed by a judge 2 hours ago. It gives us authority to excavate this site based on evidence suggesting it may contain human remains related to a 1953 missing persons case. Your client's property rights don't supersede a criminal investigation." The lawyer's mouth opened and closed. No words came out. Chen turned to her team. "Get to work." The excavation took time. The forensic team worked carefully, methodically. They photographed the cap from every angle. They measured, they took samples of the concrete. They documented the Brennan construction marking. Then they brought in equipment to break through. Marcus stood with Elena, watching. Sophia had come back with Frank, and she stood on his other side. The 3 of them, waiting to see what 70 years of burial had left behind. The concrete was thick. 2 feet, the forensic team estimated. Cole had meant for this to be permanent. But nothing was permanent. Not concrete, not lies, not the power of families built on murder. The concrete came away in chunks. Beneath it, darkness. The well shaft descending into earth. They rigged lights and lowered them down. 40 feet deep, someone said. They'd need climbing equipment, safety harnesses, proper ventilation equipment. It was going to be a long process. As the sun set, Lieutenant Chen called a halt for the day. "We'll resume tomorrow morning. Full team, proper equipment. This needs to be done right." She posted 2 officers to guard the site overnight. Then she turned to Marcus. "You've got quite a story here, Mr. Reid. Old journals, hidden documents, a 70-year-old murder. It's going to take time to verify everything." "How much time?" "Could be weeks, could be months. But if there are human remains down there, and if we can connect them to William Cross, you've just blown open a cold case that a lot of people thought was closed forever." She looked at Cole Brennan, who stood beside his lawyer looking smaller somehow, diminished. "Mr. Brennan, I'm going to ask you not to leave the county while we investigate. And if I hear about any more visits to Mr. Reid, any threats, any intimidation, I'll arrest you myself. Clear?" Cole said nothing, just turned and walked to his truck. His men followed. The convoy drove away, leaving deep ruts in the mud. That night, back at the ranch, Marcus couldn't sleep. He stood on the porch, looking out at the darkness where 1/2 mile away 2 officers guarded a grave. Sophia came out, wrapped in a blanket. "You okay?" she asked. "I hit a man today. First time since I was 20. He was going to hurt you." "I know, but still." Marcus flexed his sore knuckles. "Violence shouldn't feel that good." Sophia was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that surprised him. "I'm proud of you." Marcus looked at his daughter. In the porch light, she looked older than 16. Or maybe not older, maybe just more real. Like the armor she'd been wearing had cracked enough to let him see the person underneath. For hitting someone, for standing up. When Cole threatened you, threatened me, you didn't back down, you fought. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "Mom always said you were weak, that you gave up when things got hard. But you're not weak, Dad. You're just tired of fighting battles for yourself. You fight better for other people." Marcus didn't know what to say to that, so he just put his arm around his daughter, and she leaned into him, and they stood there watching the night. The excavation resumed at dawn. Marcus, Sophia, Elena, and Frank drove out to watch. A crowd had gathered. News vans from 3 different stations, reporters with cameras, people from town who'd heard the story and wanted to see. The Brennan family's secrets, buried for 70 years, were about to be exposed in the most public way possible. The forensic team descended into the well with their equipment and their cameras. The crowd waited in silence. Even the reporters had stopped talking. 2 hours passed, then 3. Finally, Lieutenant Chen's radio crackled. The team in the well reporting. Marcus couldn't hear what they said, but he saw Chen's face change. Saw her nod. Saw her look toward where Elena stood. Chen walked over slowly. "Mrs. Cross," she said gently, "we found human remains. Male appears to be consistent with the time period. We'll need to do DNA testing for positive identification, but based on the location and the circumstances, I believe we've found William Cross." Elena made a sound, not quite a sob, not quite a sigh, more like the release of 70 years of held breath. She swayed and Marcus caught her. "He's coming home," she whispered. "After all this time, he's coming home." But Chen wasn't finished. Her face had gone grave. "There's something else. We found a second set of remains, deeper in the well, beneath the first. Also male, also consistent with the 1950s time period." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. 2 bodies. "We found a wallet with the second set of remains. Driver's license from 1953. Name of Thomas Sullivan." Frank Hodges went pale. Tommy Sullivan, he drove delivery for Stockman Feed, disappeared late October '53. They said it was a car accident, that he went off the road and into a ravine. They never found the car or the body. "Looks like they weren't looking in the right place," Chen said grimly. Marcus thought about James Brennan's journal, the one Elena had kept hidden all these years. The entries that mentioned a witness, someone who'd seen something, someone who'd asked questions. "He killed the witness," Marcus said. "William threatened to expose him, so James killed him. Then someone saw something, someone who could connect James to William's disappearance. So James killed him too." "That's the theory we're working with," Chen agreed. "We found evidence of blunt force trauma on both skulls. And we found this." She held up an evidence bag. Inside was a heavy pipe wrench, rusted but intact. Stamped on the handle in faded letters, "Brennan Construction." The murder weapon. The crowd had gone silent. The reporters were filming everything. And somewhere in that crowd, Marcus knew someone was on the phone to Cole Brennan, telling him his grandfather's legacy wasn't just fraud. It was double murder. The news spread through Harper County like wildfire. By noon, every television in Kansas was carrying the story. By evening, it had gone national. The 70-year-old murder, the wealthy family, the hidden bodies, the pipe wrench with the killer's name stamped on it. It was the kind of story that captured attention. Justice delayed but not denied. Truth buried but not destroyed. And at the center of it all, Marcus Reid, the broke contractor from Omaha who'd bought a ranch for $1 and uncovered a murder. The reporters wanted interviews. Marcus said no to all of them. This wasn't his story to tell. It was William's. It was Elena's. But the county couldn't ignore what had been found. By the next morning, the district attorney announced a full investigation into the 1953 murders of William Cross and Thomas Sullivan. The original property seizure was being reviewed for fraud. The Brennan family's business empire was under scrutiny. And Cole Brennan was arrested, not for murder. His grandfather had done that, and James Brennan was beyond the reach of justice. But Cole was charged with destruction of evidence and obstruction of justice. The fresh concrete he'd poured over the well 2 weeks ago, the attempt to permanently seal what was already buried. Marcus watched them take Cole away in handcuffs and felt no satisfaction. Just a tired kind of sadness. Another family destroyed by lies and greed and the refusal to face truth. That afternoon, Rachel Foster came to the ranch. She had news. "The state has concluded that the 1954 property seizure was fraudulent," she said. "The debts James Brennan used to justify taking the ranch were fabricated. The auction was rigged, which means every subsequent transfer of the property and its mineral rights is invalid." "What does that mean?" Sophia asked. "It means the ranch should never have been taken from William Cross's estate, which means it should have passed to his legal widow." Rachel looked at Elena. "That's you, Mrs. Cross. You're the rightful owner of this property and all associated rights." Elena, sitting in the chair she'd claimed on the ranch porch, looked out at the land William had loved. "I'm 93 years old," she said, "dying of cancer. What do I need with a ranch?" "You need to see justice done," Rachel said. "The mineral and water rights are currently valued at $600,000. That money belongs to you. It's what James Brennan stole, what Cole Brennan has been profiting from." Elena was quiet for a long time. Then she looked at Marcus. What would William want? She asked him. Marcus thought about the journal, the careful notes, the determination to do what was right even when it cost everything. I think he'd want the truth told, Marcus said. And I think he'd want the people who came after to have something better than what he got. Elena nodded. Then that's what we'll do. The legal battle that followed was brief but intense. Cole Brennan's lawyers fought hard, but the evidence was overwhelming. The fraudulent seizure, the 2 bodies, the murder weapon with Brennan Construction stamped on it. Even the best lawyers couldn't argue against that. The court ruled that the Brennan family's claims to the mineral and water rights were null and void. The rights reverted to William Cross's estate, to be administered by his legal widow, Elena Cross. The Brennan empire, built on blood and theft, collapsed in less than a month. The bank was seized by federal regulators when the fraud investigation uncovered decades of questionable loans and deals. Brennan Resources, LLC, was dissolved. Cole's other businesses, suddenly without their foundation of stolen wealth, began to fail. The family name, honored in Harper County for 70 years, became synonymous with murder and corruption. And through it all, Elena Cross sat on the porch of the ranch William had loved and waited for one more thing: William's funeral. It was held on a cold November morning, exactly 70 years after the wedding that had been planned but never happened. Elena had arranged everything: the casket, simple pine; the grave site on the ranch overlooking the prairie; the service, brief and honest. The turnout was enormous. People from town who wanted to pay respects, descendants of people who'd known William, reporters and cameras and curious onlookers. But Marcus only saw 3 people: Elena, 93 and dying but standing straight in the November wind; Frank Hodges in his old sheriff's uniform, tears on his weathered face; and Sophia, his daughter, who'd learned what it meant to fight for something bigger than yourself. The pastor spoke about justice and truth and the long wait for both. Then he invited Elena to speak. She walked to the grave slowly, Marcus and Sophia on either side of her, holding her up. She looked down at the casket that held what remained of the man she'd loved. William Cross was a good man, she said. Her voice was thin but clear, carrying in the November air. He believed in fairness, in justice, in doing what was right even when it cost him everything. And it did cost him everything: his life, his future, his chance to grow old and see children and grandchildren. James Brennan took all of that. She paused, gathering strength. But William's truth survived. His voice, recorded on a tape, spoke across 70 years. His evidence, hidden carefully, waited for someone to care. And someone did care. She looked at Marcus. Mr. Reid came to this ranch broken and looking for a fresh start. Instead, he found a purpose. He finished what William started. He gave William justice and gave me closure. Thank you. Marcus felt tears on his face and didn't try to hide them. Around him, the crowd was silent. Even the reporters had stopped filming. They lowered William into the ground as the wind moved through the grass. Elena placed a single rose on the casket. Rest now, my love, she whispered. It's finished. 3 weeks later, Elena died peacefully in her sleep. She'd held on just long enough to see William properly buried, to see justice served, to see the Brennan name ruined. They buried her beside William, as she'd requested. The headstone was simple granite. William Cross, 1922 to 1953. Beloved husband, honest man. Elena Cross, 1931 to 2024. Beloved wife, faithful heart. Truth delayed is not truth denied. And beneath both their names, one more line, added at Elena's request in her final will: brothers in arms. But one betrayed the other, and 70 years later, truth prevailed. Marcus stood at the grave after everyone else had left. The wind was cold, promising snow. Winter was coming to Kansas. Thank you, he said to the stone, for trusting me, for giving me a chance when I didn't deserve one, for showing me that it's never too late to stand up for what's right. He turned to go and found Sophia waiting by the truck. You ready? She asked. Yeah, Marcus said. Let's go home. Home. The word had weight now. The ranch wasn't just shelter anymore. It was the place where Marcus Reid had found his way back to being the man he wanted to be, where a father and daughter had learned to fight side by side, where a 70-year-old murder had finally been solved, where truth, buried deep, had refused to stay silent. The prairie stretched empty around them as they drove back to the ranch. But Marcus didn't feel the loneliness anymore. He felt purpose, direction, hope. William Cross had given him that. A dead man's fight had saved a living man's soul. And in saving Marcus, William had also saved Sophia. She'd seen her father stand up to power, fight for justice, refuse to back down even when threatened. She'd learned that failure wasn't final, that cowards could find courage, that broken men could be made whole. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Fixing the ranch, using the money from the mineral rights to build something William would have been proud of. Making a home, a real home, for himself and his daughter. But tonight belonged to remembrance, to William and Elena and 70 years of patient revenge, to Frank Hodges and his redemption, to Rachel Foster and her belief in justice, and to Marcus Reid, who'd come to Kansas with nothing and found everything that mattered. The morning after Elena's funeral, Marcus woke to find Sophia already up, making coffee on the camp stove. Real coffee, not the instant kind they'd been drinking for weeks. She must have driven into town early. Couldn't sleep? He asked. Didn't want to. She poured him a cup. Felt wrong to sleep when there's so much to do. Marcus took the coffee gratefully. Through the window, he could see the ranch spreading out under winter sky. The barns still leaned, the fences still sagged, but somehow it all looked different now. Not like evidence of failure, but like potential waiting to be realized. Rachel called, Sophia said. Cole Brennan's lawyers filed an emergency appeal. They're trying to block the transfer of the mineral rights. Marcus wasn't surprised. A man didn't build an empire on stolen ground without learning how to fight dirty. Even from jail, Cole was using every weapon he had. When's the hearing? Tomorrow. State courthouse in Topeka. Rachel says we need to be there. They drove to Topeka that afternoon. The 3-hour journey passing in silence, punctuated by occasional conversation. Sophia had changed over the past months. The angry, resentful girl who'd climbed into his truck in Omaha had been replaced by someone harder to define. Still tough, still guarded, but with moments of softness that broke through like sun through clouds. Dad, she said as they crossed into the outskirts of Topeka, what happens if we lose? If Cole's lawyers find some loophole? Marcus had been thinking about that. Then we lose the mineral rights, the money, but we still have the ranch, still have the truth about what happened. Is that enough? It has to be. But he could hear the doubt in his own voice. The mineral rights were worth $600,000, money that could secure Sophia's future, could rebuild the ranch properly, could give them both the fresh start he'd promised when they left Omaha. Losing that felt like losing everything all over again. The courthouse in Topeka was a gray stone building that had seen a century of Kansas justice dispensed within its walls. Rachel Foster met them on the steps, briefcase in hand, her expression grim. Cole's lawyers are good, she said without preamble. Martin Voss from Kansas City, he represented 3 senators and a governor. Very expensive, very connected, very willing to play dirty. What's their argument? Marcus asked. That the statute of limitations has expired on the fraud claim. That even if the original seizure was improper, 70 years of settled expectations can't be overturned. That Cole Brennan is being punished for his grandfather's alleged crimes without due process. Alleged? Sophia's voice was sharp. We found 2 bodies. The murder weapon with his grandfather's name on it. In civil court, that's still just evidence, Rachel said. Not a criminal conviction. James Brennan is dead. He can't be tried. So technically, it's all alleged. Marcus felt something cold settle in his gut. This was the game. Not about truth or justice, but about legal technicalities and which lawyer could spin the better story. Inside, the courtroom was smaller than Marcus expected. Wood paneling, high ceiling, the seal of Kansas mounted on the wall behind the judge's bench. Maybe 40 seats for observers, most of them already filled. Marcus recognized a few reporters, some townspeople from Ashford, and sitting in the front row, Cole Brennan. Out on bail, looking relaxed in an expensive suit, like a man who knew the fix was in. The judge entered, Honorable Patricia Morrison according to the nameplate. Late 50s, gray hair pulled back, the kind of face that gave nothing away. She took her seat and surveyed the room with eyes that had seen it all before. This is an emergency hearing on the appeal of Brennan versus the estate of William Cross, she said. Her voice carried authority without needing volume. Mr. Voss, you filed the appeal. Make your case. Martin Voss stood, 60, silver hair, $1,000 suit. He moved like a man who owned every room he entered. Your Honor, this case represents a dangerous precedent. My client, Cole Brennan, is being stripped of property rights his family has held legally for 70 years based on accusations against a man who's been dead for 3 decades. He paused, letting that sink in. Yes, human remains were found on the property. Yes, there are documents suggesting James Brennan may have behaved improperly in the 1950s. But may have is not legal certainty. James Brennan was never charged, never tried, never convicted of any crime. To punish his descendants for alleged actions is fundamentally unjust. Voss pulled out a document. Furthermore, the statute of limitations on fraud claims in Kansas is 5 years. Even if we accept the claim that the 1954 property seizure was fraudulent, that claim expired in 1959, 65 years ago. He was good, Marcus had to admit, turning murder into alleged impropriety, making it sound like they were persecuting an innocent family over ancient history. The mineral rights in question have been held by the Brennan family for 7 decades, Voss continued. Taxes have been paid, leases have been negotiated, business has been conducted, 7 decades of settled expectations. To overturn all of that now, based on contested historical claims, would create chaos in property law across the state. He sat down, looking satisfied. Judge Morrison turned to Rachel. Ms. Foster? Rachel stood. She looked small next to Voss's commanding presence, but her voice was steady. Your Honor, Mr. Voss is correct that statutes of limitations exist for good reason. But Kansas law is also clear that fraud vitiates all contracts. When a property transfer is obtained through fraud, it is void ab initio, from the beginning. No statute of limitations can validate a transfer that should never have occurred. She pulled out her own documents. The evidence is overwhelming that James Brennan murdered William Cross to steal his share of the ranch and claim the mineral rights. We have William Cross's own testimony, recorded the night before his death. We have financial records proving systematic theft. We have threatening letters. We have 2 bodies in a well sealed with concrete bearing James Brennan's company name. Rachel's voice gained strength. This isn't ancient history. This is an ongoing crime. The Brennan family has profited from murder for 70 years. Every dollar they've made from those mineral rights is tainted with blood. Statute of limitations doesn't cleanse that. Your Honor, Voss interrupted, standing again. Counsel is making inflammatory statements. Murder is a serious accusation that should be proven in criminal court, not alleged in civil proceedings. Mr. Voss, you'll get it your turn, Morrison said. Ms. Foster, continue. The law recognizes that some wrongs transcend normal limitation periods, Rachel said. Fraud that remains concealed, crimes that are actively hidden, these can be addressed and even decades later. James Brennan didn't just commit fraud, he committed murder to conceal that fraud. Then he used his position and power to ensure it stayed hidden. She turned to address the judge directly. Elena Cross spent 70 years waiting for justice. She couldn't come forward earlier because the local sheriff was James Brennan's cousin. The county commission was in his pocket. She would have ended up in that well too. Should her silence, forced by fear, now work in favor of the family that murdered her husband? Morrison was quiet for a moment, her expression unreadable. The court will take a brief recess to review the filings. 15 minutes. She stood and left. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Marcus watched Cole Brennan lean over to whisper to Voss, watched the lawyer nod confidently. Rachel came back to where Marcus and Sophia sat. Hard to read her, she said. Morrison is known for being unpredictable. Could go either way. What are our chances? Marcus asked. Rachel was quiet for a moment too long. Honestly, maybe 50-50. Voss made good points about settled expectations and statutes of limitations. If Morrison rules strictly by precedent, we might lose. Sophia made a sound of frustration. That's not right. We proved what happened. We found the bodies. Law isn't always about what's right, Rachel said. Sometimes it's just about what's legal. The 15 minutes stretched into 30. Then an hour. Marcus paced the hallway, unable to sit still. Through the window, he could see Topeka spreading out below, a city going about its business while his entire future hung on one judge's decision. Finally, the bailiff appeared. Judge Morrison is ready. They filed back in. Morrison sat behind her bench, a stack of documents in front of her. Her expression gave nothing away. This is an unusual case, she began. Mr. Voss is correct that statutes of limitations serve important purposes. Stability, predictability, finality. These are valuable principles in law. Marcus felt his stomach drop. She was going to rule for Cole. However, Morrison continued, and Marcus's heart stuttered. Ms. Foster is also correct that fraud vitiates all contracts. More importantly, Kansas law recognizes the doctrine of fraudulent concealment. When a party actively conceals fraud, the statute of limitations does not begin to run until the fraud is discovered. She looked at Cole Brennan. The evidence suggests that James Brennan didn't just commit fraud in 1954. He actively concealed it by murdering William Cross and Thomas Sullivan. He used his power and connections to ensure the truth stayed buried. Literally. Morrison picked up a document. I've reviewed the evidence, the journal entries, the threatening letters, the notarized statement William Cross made 2 days before his death, the financial records, the cassette recording, and most compellingly, the 2 bodies found in a well sealed with concrete bearing James Brennan's company name. She set the document down. This court finds that the 1954 property seizure was procured through fraud. That fraud was actively concealed through murder and abuse of power. Therefore, the statute of limitations was tolled, meaning suspended, until the fraud was discovered earlier this year. Marcus felt Sophia grab his hand. The mineral and water rights transfer was based on the fraudulent seizure, Morrison continued. Therefore, that transfer is void. The rights revert to the estate of William Cross, currently administered by Marcus Reid as executor. She looked at Voss. Your client's appeal is denied. The courtroom erupted. Reporters rushed for the doors. Cole Brennan sat very still, his face gone gray. Voss was already on his feet, arguing about additional appeals, about taking it to the state Supreme Court. But Marcus barely heard any of it. They'd won. Against money and power and expensive lawyers, they'd won. Rachel was grinning, actually grinning, which Marcus had never seen before. We did it. We actually did it. Sophia threw her arms around Marcus, and he held her tight, feeling something break loose in his chest. Relief or joy, or maybe just the release of months of tension. They left the courthouse into cold December air. Marcus took a deep breath, feeling lighter than he had in years. Then his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him click accept. Marcus Reid? A woman's voice. Familiar somehow. Yes? It's Linda, his ex-wife. He hadn't spoken to her in months, not since they'd left Omaha. Linda, hi. He didn't know what else to say. I saw the news. About the case, the bodies, everything. She paused. Is Sophia there? Is she okay? Marcus looked at his daughter, who was talking animatedly with Rachel. She's good, better than good. I need to talk to you in person. Can I come to Kansas? Every instinct said no. Linda was the past, the pain, the person who'd helped destroy his old life. But something in her voice made him hesitate. Why? Because I owe you an apology. Linda's voice cracked slightly. And because Sophia deserves to hear the truth about the divorce, about what really happened. Marcus agreed without understanding why. Maybe because he was tired of fighting. Maybe because he wanted Sophia to have a relationship with her mother. Maybe because he'd learned that truth mattered, even when it was uncomfortable. Linda drove down 3 days later. She arrived in the afternoon, pulling up to the ranch in a car Marcus didn't recognize. She got out slowly, taking in the property. You've done a lot with the place, she said. Marcus looked at the barn that was still half collapsed, the fence that still sagged. It's a work in progress. They stood awkwardly for a moment. This woman he'd been married to for 25 years was now a stranger. Familiar features, foreign presence. Sophia came out of the house. She stopped when she saw her mother, and something complicated moved across her face. Hi, Mom. Hi, baby. Linda's voice was soft. You look good, healthy. I am. Another awkward silence. Then Linda said the thing she'd come to say. I need to tell you both something about the divorce, about Victoria Hartman, my lawyer. She took a breath. She lied to me, manipulated me, and I let her because I was scared. Marcus gestured to the porch. Maybe we should sit. They sat in the cold December air, and Linda told her story. When the business started failing, I panicked, she began. We'd built this life, this comfortable middle-class existence, and I watched it crumbling. Victoria was a friend of a friend. She said she could help. Linda looked at her hands. She told me Marcus was hiding money, that he was going to leave me with nothing. She showed me documents, analyses, all these things that made it look like he was incompetent or worse, deliberately sabotaging us. I wasn't hiding anything, Marcus said quietly. I know that now. But then I was terrified. Victoria was so confident, so certain. She said if I didn't act first, I'd lose everything, so I listened to her, let her transfer the house to my name. Let her move money around. Let her build the case that you were incompetent. Sophia's voice was cold. You destroyed Dad. I know. Linda's eyes were wet now. I know what I did, and I've lived with it every day, watching what it did to you, to both of you, knowing I could have fought back against Victoria, could have said no, but I didn't. Why didn't you? Marcus asked. Because part of me believed her. Part of me thought you had failed, that you were weak. Linda looked at him directly. I was wrong. You're not weak, Marcus. You're the strongest man I know. You just needed something worth fighting for. Marcus felt something shift. Not forgiveness exactly. The wounds were still too fresh for that, but understanding maybe. Linda had been scared and manipulated by someone who knew how to exploit that fear. What happened with Victoria? Sophia asked. I found out she'd been doing this to other women, convincing them their husbands were threats, pushing for scorched earth divorces, collecting her fees and moving on. There's a class action lawsuit now. I'm part of it. Linda shook her head. Doesn't change what I did, but at least maybe she'll be stopped. She turned to Sophia. I don't expect you to forgive me, either of you. I just needed you to know that your dad isn't the person I made him out to be. He's a good man who got beaten down and then found a way to stand back up. They sat in silence after that. The wind moved through the bare branches of the trees Marcus had started planting around the house. Winter birds called in the distance. Finally, Sophia spoke. I don't forgive you yet. Maybe I won't ever completely, but I understand better now. It was more than Marcus expected. More than Linda deserved, probably. But it was something. Linda stayed for dinner. It was awkward and strange and occasionally painful. But it was also necessary. The three of them sitting together, not as a family, they'd never be that again, but as three people trying to understand how they'd gotten here. After Linda left, promising to visit again soon, Marcus and Sophia sat on the porch in the dark. How do you feel? He asked. Confused, angry still, but also, Sophia searched for the word, lighter, like something that was pressing down on me got removed. Marcus understood. He felt it too. The weight of believing Linda had simply stopped loving him, had coldly calculated his destruction. That weight had been crushing. Learning she'd been manipulated, that she was as much a victim of Victoria Hartman as he was, somehow made it bearable. She's still responsible for her choices, Sophia said. Being scared doesn't excuse what she did. No, it doesn't. But people aren't all good or all bad, are they? They're just people, making mistakes, trying to survive. Marcus looked at his daughter. When had she become this wise? When did you grow up? He asked. Sophia smiled, barely visible in the darkness. Somewhere between Omaha and here. Somewhere between hating you and understanding you. Somewhere between thinking the world was simple and realizing it's complicated. 2 days later, Cole Brennan's legal team made their next move. Not an appeal, those would take months, but a different tactic. They filed a claim that the mineral rights had been improved through Brennan family investment. That even if the original transfer was fraudulent, Cole was entitled to compensation for 70 years of development, maintenance, and improvement of the resource. Rachel called Marcus with the news. It's a long shot, but it could tie things up for years. They're claiming unjust enrichment, saying that if we take the rights, we're benefiting from Brennan investment without compensation. How much are they claiming? $400,000. Marcus did the math. $600,000 in mineral rights minus $400,000 in claimed improvements left $200,000. Better than nothing, but not the future-changing money he'd been counting on. Can they win? Maybe. The law does recognize claims for improvements made in good faith, but their faith wasn't good. They knew the property was stolen. Did they, though? Cole's only 55. He wasn't even born when the murders happened. Can we prove he knew? Rachel was quiet. That's the problem. Unless we can show Cole knew about his grandfather's crimes, he might have a legitimate claim to compensation for improvements. The hearing on the unjust enrichment claim was set for 2 weeks later. Same courthouse, different issue. This time the question wasn't who owned the rights, but who owed whom money for the past 70 years. Marcus spent those 2 weeks working the ranch. He couldn't afford much yet, but he did what he could. Fixed fences, shored up the barn, started clearing the fields, physical work that let his mind rest. Frank Hodges came by most days to help. The old deputy had found new purpose in the aftermath of William's case. He'd started writing a book about it, about his failure to investigate properly and what it had cost. You ever regret it? Marcus asked one afternoon as they hammered new boards onto the barn wall. Not pushing harder back in '53? Frank was quiet for a long moment. Every day for 70 years, but regret doesn't change anything. All you can do is try to do better going forward. That's what I'm trying to figure out. How to do better going forward. You're already doing it. You stood up when it mattered, fought for something bigger than yourself. That's better than most men manage. The day before the hearing, Marcus got a visitor he didn't expect. Dylan Brennan, Cole's 18-year-old son. The kid pulled up in an old Honda, not the expensive truck Marcus would have expected. He got out hesitantly, like he wasn't sure he should be here. "Mr. Reid, I'm Dylan, Cole Brennan's son." Marcus came down off the porch slowly. "I know who you are. I wanted to talk to you if that's okay." Something in the kid's face, a kind of desperate honesty, made Marcus nod. "Okay." They sat on the porch. Dylan looked out at the prairie, struggling with how to start. "My dad's in jail because of you," he said finally. "Your dad's in jail because he tried to destroy evidence of a murder." "I know." Dylan's voice cracked. "I know what my grandfather did, what my dad tried to hide, and I'm sorry for all of it." Marcus studied the kid. He had Cole's features, but without the hardness. Just a boy whose world had been destroyed by truths he hadn't asked for. "Why are you here, Dylan?" "Because tomorrow in court, my dad's lawyers are going to argue that he didn't know about the murders, that he's innocent of his grandfather's crimes." Dylan met Marcus's eyes. "But he did know. I found my grandfather's journal when I was 14, showed it to my dad. He read it and then locked it away and told me to never speak of it again." Marcus felt something cold settle in his chest. "You're saying Cole knew James murdered William?" "For 4 years at least, maybe longer." Dylan pulled out his phone. "I recorded myself reading parts of the journal. Time-stamped, dated. I can testify that my dad knew and actively concealed it." "Why would you do that? He's your father." "Because it's wrong." Dylan's voice was firm despite the tears on his face. "Because 2 men are dead and my family profited from their murders. Because if I stay silent, I'm just as guilty." He handed Marcus a flash drive. "Everything's on here, the recording. Photos of the journal pages. Dates when I talked to my dad about it. I'll testify if you need me to. Your father will never forgive you." "I know." Dylan stood. "But I have to be able to live with myself. And I can't do that if I'm part of covering up murder." He left before Marcus could respond. Just got in his car and drove away, leaving Marcus holding evidence that would destroy what remained of the Brennan family. That night, Marcus called Rachel and told her about Dylan's visit. She was quiet for a long time. If Dylan testifies, if he can prove Cole knew about the murders, the unjust enrichment claim falls apart. You can't claim good faith improvements when you knew the property was stolen through murder. "I'll be destroying a kid's relationship with his father. You won't be doing anything. Dylan is making his own choice, a brave one." Marcus thought about that, about courage and integrity and the cost of doing what's right. Dylan Brennan was 18 years old and choosing truth over family loyalty, just like William Cross had 70 years ago. The hearing the next day was different from the first. Smaller crowd, less drama, just lawyers arguing about money and improvements and who owed whom what. Martin Voss presented his case smoothly. 70 years of mineral leases, maintenance costs, development expenses, all meticulously documented. All done, he argued, in good faith by a family that didn't know the original transfer was fraudulent. "Cole Brennan was born in 1969, Voss said, 15 years after the property seizure. He inherited the mineral rights from his father, who inherited them from James Brennan. He had no knowledge of any impropriety. He is an innocent party being punished for his grandfather's alleged crimes." Then Rachel called her witness. The defense calls Dylan Brennan. The courtroom stirred. Cole Brennan, sitting with his lawyers, went pale. He turned to look at the back of the room where Dylan stood, preparing to walk forward. "Son, don't do this," Cole said. Dylan walked to the witness stand. He was sworn in, his hands shaking on the Bible. Rachel approached him gently. "Dylan, how old are you?" 18. "And Cole Brennan is your father?" "Yes, ma'am." "Can you tell the court what you told me yesterday?" Dylan took a breath. Then he told his story. About finding the journal when he was 14. About reading his great-grandfather's confession to murder. About showing it to his father. "What did your father say when you showed him the journal?" Rachel asked. "He read it. Then he locked it in his safe. He told me the journal was family business and I was never to speak of it to anyone. He said the Brennan name was built on sacrifices and I needed to respect that." "Did he seem surprised by what was in the journal?" "No, ma'am. He seemed like he'd known for a long time." Voss was on his feet. "Objection." The witness is speculating about his father's state of mind. Sustained, Judge Morrison said. The jury will disregard that last statement. But the damage was done. Dylan had testified that Cole knew, that he'd concealed the journal, that he'd told his own son to stay silent about murder. Voss tried to discredit Dylan on cross-examination. You're testifying against your own father. Why should we believe you're telling the truth? Because it is the truth, Dylan said. His voice was steady now. And because I can prove it. He pulled out the flash drive. I recorded myself reading from my grandfather's journal 4 years ago. Time stamped and dated, the journal details the murders of William Cross and Thomas Sullivan. And it's been in my father's possession since before I was born. The flash drive was entered into evidence. The recording was played. Dylan's 14-year-old voice reading James Brennan's confession. The date stamped clear and undeniable. Cole Brennan sat with his head in his hands. His lawyers whispered urgently to each other, and Judge Morrison listened to a dead man confessing to murder through the voice of a teenage boy who'd chosen truth over loyalty. When the recording ended, the courtroom was silent. Morrison didn't need long to deliberate. The evidence is clear that Cole Brennan knew the mineral rights were obtained through fraud and murder. He actively concealed this knowledge. Therefore, his claim of good faith improvements is without merit. The unjust enrichment claim is denied. She looked at Cole with something close to contempt. Your family has profited from murder for 70 years. No amount of maintenance or development changes that. The mineral rights belong to the estate of William Cross. No compensation is owed. Cole Brennan was led away in handcuffs. The obstruction charges had been upgraded based on Dylan's testimony. New charges were being filed for fraud and concealment. The Brennan empire, already crumbling, finally collapsed completely. In the hallway, Marcus found Dylan sitting alone on a bench. The kid looked exhausted, emptied out. Marcus sat beside him. That was brave. It was necessary. Your father will hate you for it. I know. Dylan wiped his eyes. But Mr. Reid, I sleep now. For the first time in 4 years, I sleep without seeing those journal entries, without knowing I'm part of covering up murder. Marcus put his hand on the kid's shoulder. William Cross would be proud of you. They drove back to Kansas in silence. Sophia slept in the passenger seat, exhausted from the day. Marcus drove and thought about courage and integrity and the price they demanded. Dylan Brennan had sacrificed his relationship with his father to do what was right, just like William Cross had 70 years ago, just like Marcus had when he chose to pursue the investigation despite the risks. Truth demanded sacrifice, always had, always would. But truth also brought peace, the kind Dylan had described, the kind Marcus was beginning to feel. The ranch appeared as sunset painted the prairie gold and red. Home. Not perfect, not finished, but home nonetheless. Marcus pulled up to the house and sat for a moment, looking at what he'd built. Not the physical structure, though that was improving, but the life, the purpose, the relationship with his daughter. Sophia stirred awake. We home? Yeah, Marcus said. We're home. She looked at the ranch, at the barn he'd shored up and the fence he'd mended and the fields he'd started clearing. Then she looked at him. You know what Mom said? About you needing something worth fighting for? Yeah, I think you found it. Not just William's case, but this, us, building something real instead of just surviving. Marcus felt his throat tighten. You're worth fighting for. Always were. Sophia leaned over and hugged him. A real hug, not the obligatory kind. The kind that said, I see you and I'm proud of you, and maybe we're going to be okay. They went inside as darkness fell. The generator hummed. The LED lights glowed warm, and for the first time since leaving Omaha, Marcus Reid felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Spring came to Kansas like a promise kept. The prairie that had been brown and dead through the winter turned green overnight, a transformation so complete it felt like witnessing resurrection. Marcus stood on the porch of the ranch house, coffee in hand, watching the sun rise over the land that was finally, legally, irrevocably his. 3 months had passed since the final court ruling. 3 months since the mineral rights had been transferred to William Cross's estate to be administered by Marcus Reid. 3 months since Cole Brennan had been sentenced to 10 years in federal prison for fraud, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to conceal murder. The money had come through 2 weeks ago. $600,000 minus Rachel Foster's fees and taxes. Still more money than Marcus had ever imagined having. Enough to change everything. But he'd learned something in the months since buying this ranch for $1. Money wasn't what changed lives. Purpose was. Direction. The knowledge that you were building something that mattered. He heard Sophia's door open. She came out onto the porch, wrapped in a blanket against the spring chill, and stood beside him. Couldn't sleep, he asked. Too excited, she grinned. The acceptance letter came yesterday, full scholarship to Kansas State engineering program. Marcus had read that letter a dozen times already. Read about his daughter's essay, the one that had made the difference. An essay about integrity and standing up for what's right and learning that failure isn't final. An essay about him. Your mother's going to be proud, he said. She already knows. I called her last night. Sophia leaned against the porch rail. She's coming to visit next month, wants to see the ranch now that it's actually habitable. Marcus looked at the house. New roof, new windows, fresh paint. The barn had been rebuilt, standing straight and true. The fences ran clean lines across the property. 3 months of hard work and smart spending had transformed the wreck he'd bought into something that looked like it might last another 70 years. Think she'll approve? He asked. I think she'll be amazed. I know I am. They stood in comfortable silence as the sun climbed higher. This was their ritual now, these quiet mornings together before the day's work began. Father and daughter, rebuilding more than just a ranch. I was thinking, Sophia said, about the money, about what we do with it. Marcus had been thinking about that too. The $600,000 sitting in the bank, earning interest, waiting for purpose. What's on your mind? College is covered by the scholarship. The ranch is fixed up. We don't need all of it. Sophia turned to face him. Think we should do something that honors William and Elena, something that keeps their story alive. Marcus waited, letting her work through it. A foundation, she said, for people who've been wronged by powerful families or corrupt systems. Legal help, investigation support, whatever they need to fight back. Call it the Cross Foundation or something. Marcus felt something warm settle in his chest. His daughter thinking about using their windfall to help others. When had she become this person? That's a good idea, he said. A really good idea. They spent the morning researching foundations and legal structures. By noon, they had a rough plan. $300,000 to establish the Cross Foundation for Justice. Rachel Foster had agreed to serve on the board. Frank Hodges, too. They'd help people like William, people whose voices had been silenced by money and power. The remaining $300,000 would be split. Half for Sophia's future, investments and security for when she finished college. Half for the ranch and for Marcus to live on, to build the life he'd promised himself when he left Omaha. It felt right, balanced, using what William and Elena had left them to create something good. That afternoon, Marcus drove into Ashford for supplies. The town had changed since November. Or maybe Marcus had changed and just saw it differently now. People nodded to him on the street. The hardware store owner, Ron, who'd refused to serve him when Cole Brennan had him blacklisted, now greeted him warmly. Marcus, got those fence posts you ordered. And I threw in some extra wire, no charge. Figure it's the least I can do after, you know. After being too scared to stand up to the Brennans, after choosing his business over what was right. Ron didn't say it, but Marcus heard it anyway. Appreciate it, Ron. At the diner, the waitress brought him coffee without asking and comped his lunch. On the house, for what you did, finding out about William Cross and all. Everywhere Marcus went, he was treated like a hero. It was uncomfortable and embarrassing and nothing he'd asked for. He'd just been trying to understand the history of his property. The hero was William, who'd stood up 70 years ago knowing it might cost him everything. But people needed their narratives, needed to believe that truth could win, that the little guy could take down the powerful. So Marcus accepted the free coffee and the handshakes and tried not to let it go to his head. He was loading supplies into his truck when he saw Dylan Brennan across the street. The kid was working at the gas station, pumping gas for an old woman's sedan. He looked thinner than Marcus remembered, older somehow, despite only being 18. Marcus crossed the street. Dylan saw him coming and tensed. Mr. Reid. Dylan, how are you doing? The kid shrugged. Getting by. Dad's lawyers tried to sue me for the journal, said it was family property I had no right to hand over. Judge threw it out. You talked to your father? He won't see me. Told his lawyers I'm dead to him. Dylan's voice was flat, but Marcus could hear the pain underneath. Mom moved to Arizona, told me I should have kept my mouth shut. So it's just me now. Marcus thought about that. 18 years old, alone, working a minimum wage job because he'd chosen truth over family. You got plans after high school? Was going to college, had a scholarship to KU, but it was funded by a Brennan family trust. They pulled it when I testified. What do you want to study? Engineering, but I can't afford it now. saving up, working, hoping to start community college next year. Marcus made a decision. The Cross Foundation is going to need an intern, someone to help with research, case management, administrative work. Pays 15 an hour, flexible schedule so you can take classes. Interested? Dylan stared at him. You're offering me a job after what my family did? Your family did terrible things. You didn't. You stood up and told the truth when it cost you everything. That's exactly the kind of person this foundation needs. I don't know what to say. Say yes. Start Monday if you want. Work your way through college. Build a life separate from the Brennan name. Dylan's eyes were wet. Thank you, I won't let you down. I know you won't. Marcus drove home feeling lighter. One more piece falling into place. One more person getting a second chance. That evening, Frank Hodges came by with news. His book was finished. 70 Years of Silence. The William Cross Murder and the Cost of Looking Away. A publisher in Kansas City had offered him a contract. Not a huge advance, but enough to matter. I want to dedicate it to Elena, Frank said. Woman waited her whole life for justice. Least I can do is make sure people know what that wait cost her. They sat on the porch as the sun set, two men in their late years talking about second chances and redemption, and whether you could ever really make up for the mistakes of your past. I don't think you can make up for them, Marcus said, but I think you can choose to do better going forward. That's all any of us can do. Frank nodded. William taught me that, Elena too. They didn't get their time together, didn't get to grow old and have kids and all the normal things. But they got truth, eventually, and maybe that has to be enough. A week later, Marcus got a call from a number he didn't recognize. When he answered, a young woman's voice said, Mr. Reid, this is Jennifer Martinez. I'm a reporter with ProPublica. I'm working on a story about property fraud and corruption in rural America. Your case with the Brennans is exactly what I've been researching. Would you be willing to talk? Marcus almost said no. He'd turned down a dozen interview requests already. But something about her voice, professional but genuinely curious, made him pause. What do you want to know? They talked for an hour. Jennifer asked smart questions, dug into the details, wanted to understand not just what happened, but why it mattered. She was particularly interested in how small-town power structures protected corruption. The Brennan case isn't unique, she said. I've found similar patterns in Oklahoma, Nebraska, Iowa, powerful families using local connections to bury crimes, seize property, eliminate opposition. Your case is different because you won. Most people don't. Why not? Because they're tired, broke, scared. They're up against people with infinite resources, and they've got nothing. You had evidence, sure, but you also had something else. You had nothing left to lose. Marcus thought about that. She was right. When he'd come to Kansas, he'd been stripped of everything. House, business, respect, hope. That desperation had made him fearless in a way prosperity never could. If I write this story, Jennifer said, if I expose the pattern, it might help other people. People in your situation. Would that be okay? Yeah, Marcus said, that'd be okay. The article ran 6 weeks later. Front page of the ProPublica website, picked up by the New York Times and Washington Post and a dozen other outlets. How a Dollar Ranch uncovered 70 years of murder and corruption, told William's story, Elena's vigil, and Marcus's investigation in meticulous detail. The response was overwhelming. Hundreds of emails to the Cross Foundation from people who'd been wronged by powerful families, corrupt officials, systems that protected the guilty, people who needed help, who'd given up hope, who were grateful to know someone was willing to fight. Marcus and Rachel and Frank worked 12-hour days trying to respond to them all. They couldn't help everyone, didn't have the resources or the expertise, but they helped who they could. Connected people with lawyers, investigators, advocacy groups, told them their voices mattered even when the system said they didn't. It was exhausting, overwhelming, and the most meaningful work Marcus had ever done. Summer arrived, turning the prairie gold under endless sky. The ranch was fully operational now. Marcus had hired 2 local workers, both young men who needed steady employment and were willing to learn. He'd bought 20 head of cattle, started rotating them through the pastures William had once planned for the same purpose. The ranch was becoming what it should have been 70 years ago, a working operation, sustainable and honest, built on labor instead of theft. Sophia spent her summer working at the foundation, learning the systems, helping Dylan manage the flood of requests. She'd deferred her college enrollment until spring semester, wanting to help get the foundation established before she left. Marcus knew he should push her to go, to start her education, to think about her future. But selfishly, he was grateful for the extra time. These months working side by side had healed something between them that he'd thought was permanently broken. One evening in July, as they were closing the foundation office, Rachel pulled Marcus aside. "There's someone I want you to meet," she said. "Her name is Catherine Webb. She's a widow, 62, lives in Salina. Her husband died 5 years ago in what was ruled a farming accident. She thinks it was murder, covered up by the local ag company who'd been pressuring him to sell his land. You think there's a case? I think there's enough questions to warrant investigation. And I think she needs someone who understands what it's like to fight powerful interests." Rachel looked at him significantly. Someone who's been where she is and came out the other side. Marcus met Catherine the following week. She was small, weathered, with the kind of strength that came from surviving more than should be asked of any person. She told her story simply, without drama or embellishment. Her husband had refused to sell, had been threatened, had died when his combine mysteriously caught fire. The investigation had been cursory, the ruling quick. "I can't prove anything," she said, "but I know what I know, and I can't let it go." Marcus understood that feeling intimately. The foundation took her case, hired investigators, dug into the accident report, interviewed witnesses who hadn't been questioned the first time. It took 3 months, but they found evidence, proof that the combine had been tampered with, testimony from a company employee who'd been told to send a message to farmers who wouldn't sell. The case was reopened. Arrests were made. Catherine got her answers, if not her husband, back. She sent Marcus a letter afterward. "You gave me what I needed most. Not money or revenge, just validation that I wasn't crazy, that what I knew in my heart was real. Thank you for believing me when everyone else said to let it go." Marcus kept that letter in his desk, read it when the work got hard, when the cases seemed hopeless, when he wondered if any of this mattered. It mattered. Every single case mattered. Fall came, and with it Sophia's departure for college. Marcus drove her to Manhattan, helped her move into her dorm, met her roommate, pretended his heart wasn't breaking at the thought of the ranch without her. "You'll be fine," she said as they stood beside his truck, preparing to say goodbye. "You've got the ranch, the foundation, Frank and Rachel. You've got a whole life here now." "I know, but it won't be the same without you." Sophia hugged him tight. "I'm 3 hours away, Dad. I'll come home on weekends, and you can call any time. But you need to live your life, not just wait for me to come back." She was right, of course, but that didn't make it easier. Driving home alone, Marcus thought about the past year. 12 months ago, he'd been sleeping in his truck in Omaha, defeated and broken, certain his life was over at 52. Now he had a home, a purpose, a daughter who respected him, work that mattered, money in the bank, and a future that felt possible instead of terrifying. And it had all started with $1 and a decision to take a chance on an abandoned ranch. The house was quiet when he got home. Too quiet. For the first time since Sophia had joined him in Kansas, Marcus was truly alone. He stood on the porch, looking out at the prairie in the fading light, and thought about what to do with this solitude. He could call Frank, go into town, busy himself with work. Or he could just sit with it, accept that this was his life now. Not lonely exactly, just independent, self-contained. He chose to sit with it. As darkness fell, Marcus walked out to the graves. William and Elena, side by side under the stars, finally at peace. The stone markers were simple but solid, built to last. "I'm doing what I can," Marcus said to the stones. "Using the money the way I think you'd want. Helping people. Fighting for the ones who can't fight for themselves." The wind moved through the grass. Somewhere distant, a coyote called. "Sophia's doing good, going to college, going to be an engineer, build things that last. I think you'd like her. She's got your courage, William. Your stubbornness, too." Marcus smiled at that. "And Elena, I hope you found him. Wherever you both are now, hope you got the time together that you were robbed of here." He stood there a while longer, listening to the night sounds, feeling the vast emptiness and the strange fullness of the prairie. When he walked back to the house, he wasn't alone anymore. He carried William and Elena with him, their story, their sacrifice, their truth. Carried Frank's redemption and Rachel's justice and Dylan's courage. Carried Sophia's forgiveness and Linda's understanding and his own hard-won peace. The house was still quiet when he entered, but it didn't feel empty. It felt full of possibility. Marcus made dinner, simple but satisfying. Ate on the porch watching the stars emerge. Thought about tomorrow and the day after, and all the days stretching ahead. He had work to do, the foundation needed attention, the ranch needed maintenance. There were people who needed help, cases that needed investigation, truth that needed telling. But tonight, for the first time in longer than he could remember, Marcus Reid felt something he thought was lost forever. Contentment, not happiness exactly. The wounds were still too fresh, the losses still too real. Linda wasn't coming back. The years of marriage were over. The business he'd built was gone. Those failures would always be part of his story. But failure wasn't the end of the story anymore. It was just the middle, the part where the hero falls before learning to stand again. Marcus had fallen hard, had lost everything, had been broken down to nothing. And from nothing, he'd built something true. Winter came again, completing the cycle. 1 year since Marcus had bought the ranch. 1 year since he'd found the lockbox. 1 year since he'd started asking questions that changed everything. The anniversary of William's murder fell on a Tuesday in October. Marcus and Frank and Rachel held a small memorial at the graves. Just the three of them, standing in the cold wind, remembering a man they'd never met but who'd changed their lives anyway. "He'd be proud of what you've built," Frank said. "The foundation, the ranch, all of it. This is the legacy he wanted, truth and justice and people willing to fight for both." Marcus thought about that. Legacy, what you left behind, the mark you made on the world. William Cross had been murdered at 31, had barely started his life. But 70 years later, his courage was inspiring people across the country. His story was helping others find their voice. His death, terrible as it was, had meaning now. That had to count for something. As they walked back to the house, Rachel brought up something she'd been thinking about. "The foundation is growing faster than we expected. We've got more cases than we can handle, more requests than we can respond to. We need to expand." "What are you thinking?" Marcus asked. "Hire more staff, real investigators, lawyers, case managers. Turn this from a side project into a real organization." She looked at him carefully. "It means you'd have to step back from the ranch, focus full-time on the foundation. Is that something you'd want?" Marcus thought about it. The ranch was stable now. The cattle were healthy, the land productive. He could hire a manager, someone who knew ranching better than he did, could focus his energy on the work that felt most important. "Yeah," he said, "I think that's exactly what I want." They spent the next 3 months building the infrastructure, hired investigators and lawyers and administrative staff, rented office space in Ashford, proper space with room to grow, established protocols, systems, standards for which cases to take. Dylan Brennan became their first full-time case manager, despite having no experience and only a semester of community college. But he had something better than credentials. He understood what it meant to stand against your own family for the truth. By spring, the Cross Foundation for Justice had helped reopen 12 cold cases, had won compensation for 4 families wronged by corporate negligence, had provided legal support to 6 whistleblowers facing retaliation. It wasn't enough, could never be enough, but it was something, real and concrete and growing. On a warm day in May, Marcus stood at the foundation office window, watching Ashford go about its business. The town had changed since the Brennan empire fell. The bank was under new management, local ownership, fair practices. The county commission had been cleaned out, new members elected without Brennan money influencing the results. Change was slow. Some of the old guard remained, protective of their power, resentful of the scrutiny. But the foundation had shown that even entrenched corruption could be challenged. That truth could win if enough people cared. The phone rang. Dylan answered, took notes, promised to look into it. Another case, another person who needed help. This was Marcus's life now. Not what he'd planned at 52, not what he'd imagined when he'd built his construction business, married Linda, started a family. But it was good, meaningful, worth the pain it had taken to get here. That evening, Sophia came home from college for summer break. She pulled up in a used car she'd bought with money from her foundation work, proud and independent, and so much more than Marcus had dared hope she'd become. "Hey, Dad," she called, getting out. "Miss me?" Marcus hugged his daughter, grateful beyond words that she'd chosen to come back. Not because she had to, because she wanted to. "Every day," he said. They grilled steaks for dinner, sat on the porch as the sun set, talked about her classes and her plans, and the boy she'd started dating who wanted to meet her father. "You'll like him," Sophia said. "He's studying architecture, wants to design sustainable buildings. He's got integrity." Integrity. The word William Cross had died for, the word that had saved Marcus Reid. Then I'll like him, Marcus said. As darkness fell and the stars emerged, father and daughter sat in comfortable silence. The prairie stretched around them, vast and alive and full of possibility. Somewhere out there, William and Elena rested, their story told, their truth vindicated, their sacrifice given meaning. And here on the ranch they'd loved, Marcus Reid had found what he'd come to Kansas looking for. Not a fresh start exactly. You couldn't erase the past, couldn't pretend the failures hadn't happened, but a continuation, a second chapter, a chance to build something worth building with what remained. Marcus looked at his daughter, this strong young woman who'd learned to forgive, to fight, to stand up for what mattered. He looked at the house, solid and true, built on honest ground. He looked at the stars, countless and eternal, witnesses to all the small human dramas that played out beneath them. And Marcus Reid, 53 years old, divorced, broke once but not anymore, broken once but healing, knew that he was exactly where he needed to be. The ranch that had cost $1 had given him everything that mattered. Not money, though that had come. Not success, though he'd found that too. But purpose, direction, the knowledge that his life, however imperfect, was being lived in service of something bigger than himself. That was William's final gift. Not just the mineral rights or the ranch or the money, but the reminder that every life mattered. Every truth deserved telling. Every injustice demanded a response. Marcus had answered that call, would keep answering it for whatever time remained. And in answering, he had found redemption, not from the failures of his past, those were his to carry, but redemption in knowing that the rest of his story would be written differently, with courage instead of fear, with integrity instead of compromise, with purpose instead of mere survival. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new case, new people who needed help. But tonight was for rest, for gratitude, for sitting with his daughter and counting blessings and remembering that sometimes the worst moments of your life were just preparation for the best ones. Marcus stood, stretched, looked one last time at the prairie darkness. "Ready to go in?" he asked Sophia. "Yeah," she said, standing beside him. "I'm ready." They walked into the house together, into the warm light and the promise of tomorrow, leaving the darkness behind them where it belonged. The door closed. The prairie settled into night, and somewhere in that vast Kansas darkness, two grads stood, watch over the truth they'd died protecting. A truth that had waited 70 years. A truth that had finally, against all odds, prevailed. And in prevailing, had saved more than just itself. It had saved Marcus Reid, given him back his daughter, given him back his purpose, given him back his life. That was worth more than all the mineral rights in Kansas. That was worth everything.